Bright Side of the Sun, a novel by the YouTube channel Musings of a Cigarette-Smoking Man. Part 1. The Girl in the Photograph. Chapter 1. The Fixer. The girl was crying when Jack found her. She was in room 14 of the Palomar Motor Court, a collection of stucco boxes on Sepulveda that catered to the kind of trade that didn't want to be remembered. The manager had called Continental Pictures at 6 in the morning, which meant he'd called Jack Dalton 15 minutes later. And now Jack was standing in a doorway that smelled like cheap whiskey and cheaper perfume, looking at what remained of Sandra Marsh's promising career. She was 22 years old. She'd been in 3 pictures, 2 bit parts, and a supporting role in a western that hadn't done much business. The studio had her under contract for another 18 months, and they had plans for her. A romantic comedy opposite one of their second-tier leading men. Some publicity dates with actors whose preferences ran in other directions. The careful construction of an image that would sell tickets in Omaha and Tulsa and all the other places where people went to the movies to forget their lives. None of that would happen if the press found her like this. Sandra. Jack kept his voice soft. You learned that in this work. The soft voice, the patient approach, the understanding that these girls were not the enemy. They were the product, and products needed careful handling. Sandra, I need you to look at me. She was on the bed, wearing a slip that had been expensive 12 hours ago and was now evidence of something the studio would pay significantly to keep quiet. Her mascara had run into dark tributaries down her cheeks. Her hair, which a team of professionals had spent 2 hours arranging for last night's premiere, was a tangled ruin. She looked like what she was, a girl who had come to Hollywood with dreams and discovered what dreams cost in this town. I can't go back, she said. Her voice was raw, scraped hollow. I can't face them. I can't. You don't have to face anyone. Not yet. Jack moved into the room slowly, the way you'd approach a spooked horse. I'm going to take you somewhere safe, get you cleaned up, and then we're going to figure out what happens next. You don't understand. She was shaking now, her whole body trembling with something that went beyond cold or fear. I did something. Last night, I did something terrible. Jack had been doing this job for 5 years. He'd retrieved starlets from drunk tanks and abortion clinics, from the beds of married producers and the back seats of cars belonging to men whose names could never be spoken aloud. He'd learned that something terribly usually meant something manageable, a scene at a party, a photograph that needed buying, a story that needed reshaping before it reached the wrong ears. Tell me, he said. She told him. It wasn't as bad as it could have been. A fight at the after-party. Too much champagne. Words exchanged with the wife of a Paramount executive. The wife had thrown a drink. Sandra had thrown a punch. Security had separated them before real damage was done. But the wife was already making calls, already demanding that Sandra's contract be terminated, already threatening to share certain information about Sandra's past that the studio had worked very hard to bury. Jack listened, nodded, made the calculations he always made. The wife could be handled. Her husband had his own secrets, and the studio knew most of them. The scene at the party would become a misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity, something that never happened because everyone involved would agree it hadn't. Sandra's past would stay buried because the alternative was too expensive for everyone. Here's what's going to happen, Jack said, when she was finished. You're going to get dressed. I'm going to take you to a place I know in Santa Monica, where you can rest for a few days. The studio will put up a statement saying you've been taking ill, nothing serious, just exhaustion. By the time you come back, this will be over. How can you be sure? Because I'm good at my job. It wasn't a boast. It was simply true. Jack Dalton was very good at making problems disappear. It was the only thing he was good at anymore. He delivered Sandra to the house in Santa Monica, a quiet place, discreet, run by a woman named Mrs. Patterson, who asked no questions and answered fewer. The studio kept her on retainer for situations exactly like this one. Sandra would rest, would be seen by a doctor who knew how to prescribe the right things in the right doses, and in a week she would emerge looking refreshed and ready to resume her career. The illusion would be maintained. The product would remain viable. Jack drove back to the city as the sun climbed over the mountains, painting the basin in shades of gold and pink. Los Angeles in the early morning was almost beautiful, the lights soft, the smog not yet thick enough to dim the sky, the streets empty of the traffic that would choke them by noon. If you squinted, if you didn't know better, you could almost believe the place was what it pretended to be. A paradise, a new Eden, the bright side of the sun. Jack knew better. He'd known better for a long time now. He stopped at a diner on Wilshire, the kind of place that served coffee strong enough to strip paint and eggs cooked in grease that had been old when Hoover was president. He sat at the counter and thought about Sandra Marsh, about the terror in her eyes when she talked about her past, about the casual machinery that would grind her up and spit her out the moment she stopped being useful. He thought about his daughter. Lily was 8 years old. She lived in Pasadena with Jack's ex-wife Margaret and her new husband Howard, a dentist with soft hands and a kind smile and no understanding whatsoever of the world Jack moved through. Lily had her mother's blonde hair and her father's gray eyes, and when she smiled it was like watching the sun come out after a storm. Jack saw her every other weekend and called every Wednesday night. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was what he had, and he held on to it the way a drowning man holds onto driftwood. He finished his coffee, paid his bill, and drove to the office. Continental Pictures occupied a lot on Gower Street, in the section of Hollywood that had once been called Poverty Row. The major studios, Paramount, MGM, Warner Brothers, looked down on Continental the way old money looks down on new. But the truth was that Continental made pictures that made money, and in this town, money was the only language that everyone spoke. Jack's office was in a building near the back of the lot, away from the sun stages and the executive suites, in a region populated by accountants and lawyers and other people whose work was necessary, but not glamorous. His door said Dalton Investigations, which was technically true. He was licensed, had been since he'd left the department, but the sign was mostly for show. Everyone who mattered knew what Jack did, and the people who didn't matter didn't need to know. His secretary, Rose, was already at her desk when he arrived. She was 53 years old, had worked for 3 different fixers before Jack, and possessed a moral flexibility that made her invaluable. She also made excellent coffee. Wardy called twice, she said, not looking up from her typewriter. He wants to see you. When? An hour ago. Jack nodded and kept walking. Wardy Glass was his handler at Continental, the man who gave him assignments, approved his expenses, and occasionally reminded him that his continued employment depended on results. Wardy was not a patient man, but he was a practical one, and he understood that some jobs took longer than others. The retrieval of Sandra Marsh would buy Jack some goodwill. That was how the economy of favors worked in this town. You did things for people, and they owed you, and when you needed something, you called in the debt. Jack had debts owed to him all over Los Angeles, cops and reporters and studio executives, people who had needed his particular skills and hadn't forgotten. He also had debts he owed, too many of them. The ledger was getting harder to balance. He sat down at his desk and looked at the photograph he kept in the top drawer. Lily at 6, missing her front teeth, grinning at the camera like the world was full of nothing but good things. He remembered the day it was taken a Sunday at the beach, before the divorce, before everything went wrong. Margaret had been there, laughing at something he'd said, and for a few hours they had been a family, the kind of family that existed in movies and magazines and other people's dreams. That was 2 years ago, a lifetime. Phone rang. Dalton. Mr. Dalton, this is Charles Whitmore. I believe we have an appointment. Jack checked his calendar. Nothing was written there. I don't have you down, Mr. Whitmore. When did we schedule this? We didn't. I'm in your lobby. I'd like to discuss a matter of some urgency, if you have the time. There was something in the voice, old money. East Coast. The particular cadence of a man who was used to getting what he wanted, but too well bred to demand it outright. Jack's instincts owned by years of reading people, told him this was not a continental matter. This was something else. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. He hung up the phone and sat for a moment, looking at the photograph of his daughter. Then he put it back in the drawer and went to meet Charles Whitmore. Chapter 2. The Client. Charles Whitmore was not what Jack expected. He'd pictured someone soft to the idle rich, grown comfortable on inherited wealth, insulated from the world by money and manners. Instead, he found a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and aged by decades of hard use. Whitmore was tall, perhaps 6'2", with white hair cropped short and a face that belonged on a Roman coin. His suit was expensive but not showy, and his handshake, when Jack offered it, was firm without being aggressive. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment," Whitmore said. "I know it's irregular. Irregular is most of my business, Mr. Whitmore. Please sit down." Jack led him to the inner office, closed the door, and took his own seat behind the desk. Whitmore sat in the client chair with the careful precision of a man who was used to controlling his body, controlling his space, controlling everything around him. "I'll come directly to the point," Whitmore said. "I'm looking for my daughter. Her name is Elizabeth. She's been missing for 9 months." Jack reached for the notepad he kept on his desk. "Missing from where?" "Here, Los Angeles. She came out 2 years ago to pursue a career in pictures. For the first 18 months, I heard from her regular letters, telephone calls, the occasional visit home. Then 9 months ago, the communication stopped. No letters, no calls, nothing. Did you contact the police?" "Of course." The Los Angeles Police Department was less than helpful. They investigated for 2 weeks and concluded that Elizabeth had most likely left the city voluntarily. They suggested she might have gone to Mexico with a boyfriend. "Did she have a boyfriend?" "Not that I was aware of, and the detective I spoke with couldn't provide a name, a description, anything concrete. He simply said," Whitmore's voice tightened, the first crack in his controlled facade, "that young women in Hollywood often run off with unsuitable men, and that she would probably contact me when she was ready." Jack had heard this story before, or versions of it. The LOPD had a long history of not looking too hard for people who went missing in Hollywood, especially if those people were young women without connections. The reasons varied: corruption, laziness, the simple fact that most missing persons cases in this city involved people who didn't want to be found, but the result was the same. Families left without answers, questions that never got asked, cases that gathered dust in filing cabinets until everyone forgot they existed. "You said you came directly to the point," Jack said. "I'm guessing you didn't fly across the country just to tell me the LOPD was unhelpful." "No." Whitmore reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "I've conducted my own investigation, such as it was. I hired 3 different private detectives over the past 6 months. Each of them made some progress initially, then hit a wall. 2 of them returned my retainer and refused to continue. The third simply stopped returning my calls." "Did they say why?" "Not directly, but I formed an impression." Whitmore's eyes met Jack's, and there was something in them that Jack recognized, the particular desperation of a father who has run out of options. "I believe my daughter became involved in something that the people of this city would prefer to keep hidden, something that has the power to make investigators disappear. That's a significant claim." "It is, and I'm prepared to pay significantly to have it investigated." Whitmore set the envelope on the desk between them. "I've been told that you're the man to see when something needs to be found in Los Angeles, that you have connections the police don't have, access to places they can't go, that you're the person who solves problems that can't be solved through official channels." "Who told you that?" "Does it matter?" It didn't, not really. Jack's reputation was what it was. He'd built it carefully, over years, cultivating the image of a man who could get things done, a man who knew where the bodies were buried because he'd helped bury some of them. "What's in the envelope?" $10,000, a retainer. If you find my daughter, if you find out what happened to her, there will be more." Jack didn't reach for the envelope. He sat very still, feeling the weight of the moment. the pull of the case against his better judgment. "I'm not a missing persons investigator," he said. "I'm a fixer. I clean up messes for the studio. This isn't my kind of work." "Then perhaps you could recommend someone." I didn't say no. Jack pat him off, surprising himself. I said it's not my kind of work. That's different. Whitmore waited. "Tell me about your daughter, not the missing part. Before that, what was she like? What did you want?" Something shifted in Whitmore's face, a softening, a grief that he'd been holding at bay. When he spoke again, his voice was different, stripped of its careful control. "She was brilliant. Not just beautiful, everyone tells me. She was beautiful, but genuinely talented. She was in plays at Vassar, won awards. When she said she wanted to come to Hollywood, I thought it was a phase, something she'd grow out of. But she was serious. She worked at it the way she worked at everything, completely, without compromise." "Did she have success?" "Some. Small parts. Screen tests. She wrote that she was getting closer, that the right opportunity was just around the corner. Then the letters changed. She seemed tired, discouraged. She started asking for money more often, which was unlike her. She'd always been independent, proud of making her own way." "Did you send it?" "Of course. Whatever she asked for. I would have given her anything." Whitmore's hands, resting on his knees, clenched slightly. "The last letter I received was dated January 15th. She said she'd met some people who might be able to help her career. She sounded hopeful for the first time in months. Then nothing." Jack thought about Sandra Marsh, crying in a motel room. He thought about all the girls who came to the city with hope in their hearts and left with something else entirely, if they left at all. He thought about Lily. "Do you have a photograph?" Whitmore reached into his jacket again and produced a picture. It was a professional shot, the kind that actresses send to agents and casting directors. Elizabeth. Whitmore looked out at Jack with eyes that were dark and intelligent, a face that balanced beauty and character, a smile that suggested she knew something amusing that she wasn't quite ready to share. She was 20, 3 years old in the photograph. She had been 23 for 9 months now, frozen in time while the world moved on without her. Jack looked at the photograph and saw his daughter's face in 10 years. "I'll take the case," he said. Chapter 3. The official story. The LDD's Central Division occupied a building on First Street that looked like it had been designed by someone who believed architecture should be a punishment. Jack had worked out of this building for 8 years, had made detective here, had broken cases here, had learned how the city really operated within these walls. He'd also learned why he couldn't stay. The desk sergeant recognized him, but didn't smile. That was fine. Jack wasn't here to make friends. "Detective Paulson," Jack said. "He's still in homicide. Missing persons now. 3rd floor." Jack took the stairs, feeling the familiar weight of the building pressing down on him. He'd been happy here once, or something close to it. He believed in the work, believed that the badge meant something, believed that the system, flawed as it was, could be made to function. That belief had cost him everything. Paulson was at his desk, surrounded by the detritus of a career that had peaked years ago and was now grinding toward a pension. He was 55, heavy in the middle, with the florid complexion of a man who'd make peace with a bottle. He looked up when Jack entered and didn't bother to hide his lack of enthusiasm. "Dalton, heard you were working for the studios now. News travels. In this building it does. What do you want?" Jack sat down without being invited. "Elizabeth Whitmore. You caught her case 9 months ago." Something flickered behind Paulson's eyes, recognition, or maybe wariness. "The actress. Yeah, I remember. Father's been making noise, trying to get the case reopened. He hired me. Then he wasted his money. The girl ran off. They always run off. These Hollywood types. One day they're chasing their dreams. The next they're chasing some guy to Mexico or San Francisco or wherever the wind takes them. She'll turn up eventually. They always do. Except when they don't." Paulson's expression hardened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've looked at your case file. You investigated for 2 weeks, interviewed 3 people, and concluded she left voluntarily. You didn't talk to her roommate, didn't check her bank records. didn't follow up on the modeling agency she was working with. You did the minimum required to close the case and moved on. I did my job. You did something. I'm not sure I'd call it your job. They stared at each other across the desk. Paulson was the first to look away. You want to know what I think? His voice was quieter now, less defensive. I think the girl got into something she couldn't handle. This town chews up pretty girls and spits them out. Most of them land on their feet. More or less. Some of them don't. It's not a crime. It's just the way things are. What kind of something? I don't know. I didn't ask. There are some questions. Paulson stopped, seemed to reconsider. Look, Dalton, you were a good cop. Everyone said so. But you're not a cop anymore. And this isn't your kind of case. The Whitmore girl is gone. Her father can spend all the money he wants, hire all the investigators he wants, and he's not going to find her. Because some people don't want to be found, and some people can't be found, and sometimes those are the same thing. Who told you to close the case? The question hung in the air between them. Paulson's face went through several expressions in a rapid succession: surprise, anger, fear, resignation. Nobody told me anything. I made a judgment call based on the available evidence. Bullshit. Believe what you want. I'm done talking to you. Paulson stood up, gathering papers from his desk that didn't need gathering. You want to chase ghosts, that's your business. But don't come back here expecting help. You're not one of us anymore, Dalton. You made sure of that. Jack stood up slowly. One more question. The boyfriend she supposedly ran off with, what was his name? Paulson didn't answer. You don't have a name, do you? You don't have anything. Just a story that let you close the file and forget about a girl who probably needed someone to look for her. Get out. Jack got out, but he stopped at the door and looked back at the man he might have become if he'd played ball, if he'd learned to look the other way, if he'd accepted that some questions weren't worth asking. You know what the difference is between us, Paulson. I couldn't live with the silence. You couldn't live without it. He left Paulson standing alone in his office, surrounded by the files of people who had disappeared and would never be found. The next stop was the Hall of Records. Jack spent 3 hours there, pulling every document he could find related to Elizabeth Whitmore. Her rental agreement for an apartment in Hollywood, her vehicle registration, a 1954 Ford Fairlane Blue, which was still registered to her address. Her bank records, which showed regular deposits until 8 months ago, and no activity since. The picture that emerged was of a life that had simply stopped. No forwarding address, no transfer of funds, no indication that she had planned to leave. Her apartment had been emptied. He'd have to check on Madame, and when her car had been found abandoned on a street in West Hollywood 3 weeks after her last contact with her father. The police report on the car was sparse. No damage, no signs of foul play, no explanation for why it had been left there. Jack made copies of everything and put them in a folder. The folder went into his briefcase next to the photograph Whitmore had given him. Elizabeth Whitmore's face looked up at him as he closed the case. Hopeful, doomed. He drove to Hollywood. The apartment building was on Yucca Street, a 3-story Spanish revival that had been elegant 30 years ago and was now merely faded. The manager was a woman named Mrs. Chen, small and suspicious, who looked at Jack's card like it might bite her. Police already came, she said, months ago. They took her things. They took everything? Not everything. What was left? She shrugged. Girls like her, they don't have much. Clothes, books, some photographs. The police said someone would come back for the rest, but nobody did. Did she have visitors? Anyone who came to see her regularly? Mrs. Chan's eyes narrowed. Why do you want to know? Her father hired me. He's trying to find out what happened to her. Something shifted in the woman's expression. Sympathy, maybe, or just the weariness of someone who had seen too many girls come and go from her building. There was a man, older, nice car, nice clothes. He came a few times in the last month she was here. She would dress up before he arrived, not like she was going to an audition, but like she was going somewhere special. Did she say who he was? She said he was helping her career, a producer maybe, or someone who knew producers. She seemed excited. Mrs. Chen paused. Then she seemed scared. The last few times he came, she didn't want to go, but she went anyway. Can you describe him? The description was vague. Tall, gray hair, distinguished, but it was more than Jack had before. He wrote it down, thanked Mrs. Chen, and asked one more question. The things the police didn't take, do you still have them? She did. A single box, stored in the basement, containing the remnants of Elizabeth Whitmore's Hollywood dream. Jack carried it to his car and drove home through streets that were beginning to fill with the evening traffic. He didn't open the box until he was in his apartment, alone, with a glass of bourbon to steady his nerves. Inside, he found clothes that had been worn and washed many times. A few books, mostly novels, well thumbed, a jewelry box containing cheap earrings, and a single good piece of pearl necklace that looked like a family heirloom, and photographs. There were dozens of them, loose in the bottom of the box, headshots and candids. Elizabeth alone, and Elizabeth with other girls, parties and auditions, and what looked like screen tests. Jack spread them across his table and studied them, looking for patterns, looking for faces that repeated, looking for anything that might tell him who Elizabeth had become in the months before she disappeared. One photograph stopped him. It was a group shot taken at what looked like a party in a large house. Elizabeth was in the center, laughing, glass in hand. Around her were other girls, beautiful, young, anonymous, and behind them, half hidden in shadow, was a face Jack recognized. Richard Cray, producer at Continental, a man Jack had done favors for in the past. Small jobs, nothing that stuck in the memory. Jack looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called Rose. I need you to find me everything we have on Richard Crane, and I need it by morning. Chapter 4. The Trajectory. The file on Richard Crane was thin, which told Jack more than its contents did. In a town where everyone had a past, and most of those pasts were documented, the absence of information was its own kind of store. Crane had produced 6 pictures for Continental over the past 4 years, modest budgets, modest returns. Nothing that would make him a star, but enough to keep him employed. Before that, he'd worked at Argyle and Republic, always in the middle tier, never quite breaking through. He was 42 years old, divorced twice, no children. He owned a house in Laurel Canyon and drove a Cadillac that was more expensive than his salary would suggest. He threw parties that were talked about in certain circles, but never written about in the papers. That last detail was the interesting one. Jack spent the morning making calls to contacts at other studios, to gossip columnists who owed him favors, to girls who had worked with Crane and were willing to talk. The picture that emerged was of a man who existed in a particular space, too small to be important, too connected to be ignored. He knew people. He introduced people. He was, in the parlance of the industry, a facilitator. He's a pander, said Irene Marks, a retired actress who now ran an acting school in the valley. That's what they call them in polite society. He finds girls and introduces them to men who can help their careers. Sometimes the help is real, sometimes it isn't. What do you mean? I mean some of the girls who go to his parties end up in pictures, and some of them end up somewhere else. She paused, and Jack could hear the weight of experience in her silence. I stopped asking where, a long time ago. The address for Crane's office was in the Continental directory. Jack drove there after lunch, parking on a side street and walking the last block to clear his head. The building was nondescript, one of a dozen like it on Sunset, housing the support apparatus of the Dream Factory. Crane's name was on a door on the 3rd floor, gold letters on frosted glass. Crane Productions. Jack knocked. Come in. The office was larger than Jack expected, furnished with a taste that aspired to class, but fell slightly short. Crane was behind a desk that was too big for him, a small man in an expensive suit, with thinning hair and nervous hands that never stopped moving. Mr. Dalton, I was told you might be coming. Word travels fast. In this town, it does. Please sit down. Can I offer you a drink? Jack declined both the seat and the drink. He remained standing, looking down at Crane, watching the man's hands flutter across the surface of his desk. "I'm looking for Elizabeth Whitmore. I understand you knew her." "Who told you that?" "Does it matter?" Crane's eyes darted to the door, then back to Jack. He was scared, but much was obvious. The question was what he was scared of. "I knew her. Not well. She came to a few parties, industry events. She was a lovely girl. Very talented. I was sorry to hear she'd gone missing." "Did you introduce her to anyone?" "I introduce many people to many other people. It's part of my job. I'm a producer. I help young talent find opportunities." "What kind of opportunities did you find for Elizabeth?" The hands stopped moving. Crane's face went through several expressions before settling on something that looked like resignation. "Mr. Dalton, I'm going to be very direct with you. Elizabeth Whitmore was a beautiful young woman in a city full of beautiful young women. She wanted to be a star. She was willing to do things that some girls aren't willing to do. I introduced her to people who might be able to help her career. That's all." "What people?" "I don't remember." "Try harder." "I don't remember." Crane's voice was firmer now, the fear giving way to something else. "And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. There are some names you don't say in this town, Mr. Dalton. Some doors you don't knock on. You were a cop, you should know that better than anyone. I was a cop who didn't take orders from people like you. And look where that got you." Crane stood up, a small man trying to make himself larger. "I've told you what I know. Elizabeth came to some parties. She met some people. Then she stopped coming. I don't know where she went, and I don't know what happened to her. That's the truth." "Whose parties?" "My parties. Industry events. Nothing unusual." "What about other parties?" "Private ones. In the hills." Something flickered across Crane's face, recognition, fear, a door slamming shut behind his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." "Then you're wrong." Crane moved toward the door, opened it, stood beside it in a clear invitation for Jack to leave. "I'm sorry I can't be more helpful. I hope you find the girl. I really do. But I can't help you anymore." Jack walked to the door, stopped beside Crane, looked down at him with the particular expression he'd learned in 1,000 interrogation rooms. "You're scared," he said. "I understand that. But here's the thing about fear, Mr. Crane. It makes people do stupid things. It makes them lie when they should tell the truth, run when they should stand still, trust people who can't be trusted." "Is that a threat?" "It's an observation. I'm going to find out what happened to Elizabeth Whitmore. That's not a threat either. It's a fact. And when I do, I'm going to remember everyone who tried to stop me." He left Crane standing in the doorway, a small man's hands already starting to flutter again. The next name on Jack's list came from one of his contacts at the Times. Helen Marchetti, who had been Elizabeth's roommate for 6 months before she disappeared. Marchetti lived in a bungalow in West Hollywood, a small place with too many plants and not enough light. She was 25, dark-haired, with a kind of face that photographed well but didn't stop traffic. She'd been in pictures herself, before small parts, like Elizabeth, the endless middle tier that most actresses occupied until they gave up or got lucky. She'd given up. She was working as a secretary now at an insurance company in Pasadena, and when she talked about her time in Hollywood it was with the particular weariness of someone describing a country they'd fled. Lizzie was different, she said. She really believed she could make it. Not just hope, believe. It was almost like a religion with her. She would do anything, sacrifice anything, to get where she wanted to go. Anything? I know how that sounds, but I don't mean she was desperate or stupid. She was strategic. She understood that this town runs on relationships, on knowing the right people, on being in the right rooms at the right time. She was willing to do what it took to get into those rooms. Richard Crane's rooms. Helen's face changed. You know about that. I know she went to parties. I know she met people. I'm trying to find out what happened next. What happened next is she changed. Helen lit a cigarette with hands that weren't quite steady. The first few parties she came home excited. She'd met this producer, that director, someone who was going to get her a screen test. It was all she could talk about. Then, after maybe 2 months, she stopped talking about it at all. Why? I don't know. I'd asked her, and she said everything was fine. She was just tired. But she wasn't tired, Mr. Dalton. She was scared. I could see it in her eyes. Something had happened, something she wouldn't talk about, and it changed her. Did she ever mention a room? Helen went very still. The cigarette in her hand trembled slightly. Who told you about that? Nobody. I'm asking. She mentioned it once. Just once. We were drinking wine late at night. And she said, Helen paused, collecting herself. She said she'd been invited to something special, a private room at one of the houses in the hills. She said the people there could make her a star if she did what they wanted. I asked her what they wanted, and she just looked at me with this emptiness in her eyes. And she said everything. Did she go? I don't know. That was maybe 3 weeks before she disappeared. She didn't talk about the parties after that. She barely talked at all. And then one morning, I woke up and she was gone. Her clothes, her things, everything, like she'd never been there. Did you tell the police about the room? I tried. The detective who interviewed me didn't want to hear it. He kept pushing me to say she had a boyfriend, that she'd run off with someone. When I told him about the parties, about the room, he shut his notebook and told me to stop wasting his time with actress drama. Jack thought about Paulson, about the closed case file, about the careful machinery that had been deployed to make Elizabeth Whitmore disappear twice, first from the world, then from the record. The houses in the hills, he said. Do you know where they were? I went once, just once, to one of the regular parties before things got strange. Helen stubbed out her cigarette and lit another. It was in Laurel Canyon, off Mulholland, a big place, Spanish style, lots of windows. The pool that looked out over the city. There was a sign at the end of the driveway. A name. I remember thinking it was strange, because the name didn't match the person who owned it. What was the name? Elysium. Helen's voice dropped. The house was called Elysium. Chapter 5. The parties. Jack spent 2 days researching the house called Elysium. It wasn't easy. Property records were a maze of shell companies and holding corporations, each one leading to another, the paper trail designed to obscure rather than reveal. But Jack had learned a long time ago that all trails led somewhere, and if you followed them long enough, you found what you were looking for. The owner of record was something called the Pacific Cultural Foundation, a non-profit organization that claimed to promote artistic expression and creative collaboration. Its board of directors was the list of names that meant nothing: lawyers, accountants, professional blank faces. But its donor list, which Jack obtained through a contact at the state attorney general's office, was considerably more interesting. Harold Kenyon, Walter Reeves, Arthur Sinclair. Jack knew the names. Everyone in Los Angeles knew the names, or at least everyone who paid attention to the machinery that actually ran the city. Kenyon was head of production at Paramount, one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. Reeves was a city councilman, chair of the committee that controlled zoning and development. Sinclair was an industrialist, defense contracts, the kind of money that didn't need to make movies because it made things that went boom. These weren't criminals. These were the men who decided what was and wasn't criminal, the men who wrote the rules and paid the people who enforced them. If they were connected to Elysium, then Elysium was connected to power in ways that made Jack's investigation very complicated and very dangerous. He drove up to Laurel Canyon on a Tuesday afternoon, following the winding roads through territory that felt like a different world. The houses here were set back from the street, hidden behind gates and hedges, visible only in glimpses of roof line here, a flash of windows there. This was where the real money lived, the people who owned the studios rather than worked for them. Elysium was at the end of a private road, behind a gate that was firmly closed. Jack parked 100 yards away and watched through binoculars as a gardener's truck went in, then came up again an hour later. The gate opened automatically both times, which meant there was someone inside watching. The house itself was impressive: Spanish colonial revival, 3 stories, with a terracotta roof and windows that caught the afternoon light. It sat on a ridge overlooking the city, with views that probably stretched all the way to the ocean on clear days. There was a pool, just as Helen had described, and beyond it a lawn that sloped down toward a grove of oak trees. A beautiful place, the kind of place where beautiful things might happen, or ugly things hidden behind beautiful walls. Jack made note of the security arrangements, the camera at the gate, behind the walls, the blind spots where someone might get in without being seen. He was already thinking about how to get inside, how to find evidence of what happened there, how to connect this place to Elizabeth Wetmore's disappearance. But he knew he couldn't just break in. Not yet. He needed more information. He needed to understand what he was dealing with before he walked into something he couldn't walk out of. He drove back to the city and started making calls. The first call was to Ben Carter. Carter was a reporter at the Times, one of the old breed, the kind who still believed that newspapers were supposed to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. He'd been writing about corruption in Los Angeles for 20 years, and he was still alive, which meant he knew how to be careful. They met at a bar on Alvarado, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and nobody remembered faces. Elysium, Carter said, when Jack told him what he'd found. Jesus, Dalton, you know how to pick them. You've heard of it? Heard of it. Never been able to prove anything. Carter took a long pull from his beer. There are rumors, have been for years, private parties for the rich and connected. Girls who go in and don't come out. Films that get made for an audience of a few dozen people who could buy and sell the rest of us 1,000 times over. What kind of films? Kind that don't get shown in theaters. The kind that would end careers if they ever got out. Kind that make the people in them do whatever the people who own them want. Carter set down his beer. Leverage, Dalton. That's what Elysium is about. Not pleasure power. You film someone doing something unforgivable, and you own them forever. Who's behind it? That's the question, isn't it? I've got theories. Kenyon at Paramount. Reeves on the city council there in the donor list for the foundation, you said. There are others too, probably. The kind of men who don't leave fingerprints, who operate through intermediaries and shells and plausible deniability. Can you help me? Carter was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. I can try, but you need to understand something, Dalton. The people behind Elysium, if they exist. If any of this is real, they don't play by the same rules as the rest of us. They own the cops, the courts, the press. They can make people disappear. They can make investigations disappear. They can make anyone who asks too many questions disappear. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you look like a man who's about to walk into a wood chipper. Jack thought about Elizabeth Wetmore, about her photograph, about the hope in her eyes. He thought about Lily, about the phone calls every Wednesday, about the weekends that were never long enough. I don't have a choice, he said. Carter nodded slowly. No, I don't suppose you do. They talked for another hour, sharing information, building a picture of what Jack was up against. When they parted, Carter gave him a piece of advice. Be careful who you trust. The people you're looking for have eyes everywhere. If they find out you're investigating them, they'll come for you, and they won't come alone. Jack drove home through streets that were beginning to feel like enemy territory. Chapter 6. The producer, Richard Crane, wasn't answering his phone. Jack tried 3 times over 2 days, leaving messages that became progressively more pointed. By the 3rd day, he was done being civil. He found Crane at the Continental lot, coming out of a screening room with a clipboard in one hand and the expression of a man who had just watched something he didn't enjoy. When he saw Jack waiting for him, his face went through several changes before settling on resignation. Mr. Dalton, I thought I made myself clear. You made yourself clear. I'm not here for clarity. I'm here for names. I told you. You told me nothing. Now I'm going to tell you something. Jack moved closer, lowering his voice to the register that made men pay attention. I know about Elysium. I know about the parties. I know about the films. And I know that you're the one who brings the girls. Crane's face went pale. The clipboard slipped from his fingers and clattered on the pavement. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. And here's the thing, mister. Crane, I don't care about you. You're a small man doing a small job for people who would throw you away without a second thought. What I care about is Elizabeth Whitmore. You tell me what happened to her, and maybe I forget I ever heard your name. I can't or won't, can't. Crane's voice was barely a whisper. You don't understand. These people, they're not like you and me. They have resources, connections. If I talk to you, if they find out, if you don't talk to me, I'll make sure they find out you already did. The color drained from Crane's face. He looked around the lot, at the grips and technicians going about their business, at the ordinary world that suddenly seemed very far away. Not here, he said. Tonight, there's a restaurant on Pico, near Western. Meet me there at 9. How do I know you'll show? You don't, but I'll be there. Crane picked up his clipboard with trembling hands. God help me, I'll be there. The restaurant was called La Paloma, a small Mexican place with dim lighting and booths that offered privacy. Crane was already there when Jack arrived, sitting in the back corner nursing a drink that looked like it wasn't his first. Jack slid into the booth across from him and waited. You have to understand, Crane began. I didn't know. At first I didn't know what they were doing. I thought it was just parties, rich men, pretty girls, the usual Hollywood arrangement. I've been facilitating that kind of thing for years. It's how the business works. When did you find out? About 6 months ago. One of the girls, I won't give you her name, she came to me. She was crying. She said she'd been to a special party, a private one. She said they'd filmed her doing things she didn't want to do. What kind of things? Bad things. Things that would destroy her, if anyone ever saw them. Crane took a drink, his hands shaking. She asked me for help, asked me to get the films back. I told her I'd try. I made some calls, asked some questions. And the next day, 2 men came to my office. They were very polite. They explained that the films were property of certain individuals, and that those individuals didn't appreciate inquiries. They suggested that I should forget the girl had ever come to me, and that I should continue doing my job without asking questions. What happened to the girl? She left town, went back to wherever she came from. The smart ones do that. The ones who don't. Crane stopped, staring into his drink. Elizabeth didn't leave. No, Elizabeth was ambitious. Too ambitious. She thought she could play the game, could use the parties to get what she wanted without getting used herself. He looked up at Jack, and there was something like grief in his eyes. She was wrong. They're always wrong, the ones who think they're different. What happened to her? I don't know, not for certain, but the last time I saw her, she told me she'd been invited to something special. A private session, she called it. In the room. What room? I don't know what it is, exactly, but I know it exists, and I know that the girls who go there don't come back the same. Some of them don't come back at all. Crane finished his drink and signaled for another. Elizabeth went to the room, Mr. Dalton. That's the last anyone heard of her. Who invited her? Who runs the room? I don't know names. I don't want to know names. But there's someone, a man who handles things for the people who use Elysium. He's the one who decides which girls are suitable, which ones get invited to the special parties, which ones go to the room. What's his name? Crane hesitated. The fear in his eyes was almost physical, a living thing that seemed to crawl across his skin. Lomax, he said finally. His name is Vincent Lomax. Chapter 7. The Warning. Jack found Vincent Lomax. 2 days later, or rather, Vincent Lomax found him. He was waiting outside Jack's apartment building when Jack came home from interviewing another of Elizabeth's former acquaintances. A black sedan was parked at the curb, and Lomax was leaning against it with the casual ease of a man who had all the time in the world. He was not what Jack expected. The fixers Jack knew were usually one of 2 types, thugs in cheap suits or lawyers in expensive ones. Lomax was neither. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with the lean build of a distance runner and the kind of face that wouldn't stand out in a crowd. His suit was well, but not flashy. His hair was neatly trimmed, and his eyes, when they met Jack's, held the calm assessment of someone who had seen everything and been surprised by none of it. Mr. Dalton. His voice was pleasant, conversational. I was hoping we could talk. Do I know you? Not yet, but I know you. I know you've been asking questions about things that don't concern you. I know you've been talking to people who should know better than to talk." He smiled, and there was nothing threatening in it. "I'm here to offer you an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" "The kind where you walk away with your health and your reputation intact. Maybe even a little money in your pocket." Lomax reached into his jacket slowly, carefully, making sure Jack could see his hand, and withdrew an envelope. $10,000. Cash. The same amount your client gave you. You return his retainer, tell him the girl can't be found, and this becomes a pleasant memory. Jack looked at the envelope. $10,000 was more money than he made in a year. It would pay off his debts, set him up in a new city, give him a fresh start. All he had to do was forget Elizabeth Whitmore. "The girl," Jack said. "Is she alive?" Something flickered in Lomax's eyes, not surprise, exactly, but a recalculation. "That's not the question you should be asking. It's the only question that matters." "Then let me answer it this way. The girl is gone in a way that you can't bring her back from. No matter how many questions you ask or doors you knock on, you can spend the rest of your life looking for her, and you'll never find her. Some things are lost forever, Mr. Dalton. That's not a threat. It's just the truth. Wait, if I don't believe you, then you'll learn." Lomax tucked the envelope back into his jacket. "I tried, Mr. Dalton. I want you to remember that. I came to you like a civilized man, offered you a civilized solution. If you choose not to take it," he shrugged, "then we'll handle things differently." "Is that a threat?" "It's a prediction. The people I work for have resources you can't imagine. They've been handling problems like you for a very long time. If you become a problem, you'll be handled. Simple as that." Jack thought about Lily, about the phone calls and the weekends, about the photograph in his desk. He thought about Elizabeth Whitmore, about the hope in her eyes, about all the girls who came to the city and disappeared without anyone asking questions. "Tell your people something for me," Jack said. "What's that?" "Tell them I'm not going away. Tell them that every time they try to stop me, I'm going to push harder. Tell them that I've been pushed out of better places by worse people, and I'm still standing. And tell them—" He stepped closer to Lomax, close enough to see his own reflection in the man's calm eyes. "Tell them that if they touch my family, if they even look at my family, I'll burn this whole city down to find them." Lomax was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "You're a brave man, Mr. Dalton, or a foolish one. In my experience, those are usually the same thing." He got into the sedan and drove away, leaving Jack standing on the sidewalk, watching the taillights disappear into the Los Angeles night. The warning had been delivered. The clock was now ticking. Jack went upstairs and called Margaret. "I need you to take Lily somewhere," he said. "Your sister's in San Diego. Go there, tonight." "Jack, what's going on? You're scaring me." "Good. You should be scared. I've gotten into something bigger than I realized. These people, they might come after you to get to me. I need you and Lily somewhere safe." "What people? What are you talking about?" "I can't explain now. Just trust me. Please, Margaret, for Lily's sake." There was silence on the other end of the line. When Margaret spoke again, her voice was tight with the particular anger of someone who has been frightened against their will. "You promised me, Jack, when we got divorced, you promised that your work wouldn't touch us. You said you'd keep us safe." "I know, but you couldn't help yourself. You had to take another case. Had to be the hero. Had to prove something to yourself that no one else cares about. Margaret, I'll take Lily to San Diego, not because you asked me to, but because I want my daughter to grow up. And Jack," her voice hardened, "when this is over, if you're still alive, don't call us. Don't come around. We're done." The line went dead. Jack sat in his empty apartment, listening to the silence, and wondered if what he was doing was worth what it was going to cost. Then he picked up the phone and called Ben Carter. "I need to see those files you mentioned, the ones about Elysium, tonight, if possible." "What happened?" "I got a visit from a man named Vincent Lomax." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Lomax came to you personally?" "He did." "Then you're in deeper than I thought. Come over. I'll show you what I have." Jack hung up the phone, grabbed his coat and headed out into the night. Behind him, in the desk drawer, the photograph of his daughter smiled at no one. End of part 1. The Girl in the Photograph. Part 2. The Room. Chapter 8. The Photographer. Ben Carter lived in a bungalow in Silver Lake, the kind of place that had been cheap when he bought it 20 years ago, and was still cheap because he'd never bothered to fix it up. Books lined every wall, stacked on shelves, and piled on floors. The accumulated research of a career spent looking into things that powerful people wanted kept hidden. He met Jack at the door with a glass of bourbon in one hand and a worried expression on his face. "You look like hell," Carter said. "I feel like it. Show me what you have." Carter led him to a back room that served as his office. More books, more files, a typewriter that looked like it had survived a war. On the desk was a folder, thick with clippings and photographs and handwritten notes. "This is everything I've gathered on Elysium over the past 3 years," Carter said. "Rumors mostly. Second-hand accounts. Kind of thing that wouldn't hold up in court, but ain't a picture if you know how to look at it." Jack opened the folder and started reading. The picture it painted was worse than he'd imagined. Parties had been going on for at least a decade, maybe longer. They'd started small private gatherings at the houses of wealthy men. The usual Hollywood arrangement of pretty girls and powerful patrons. But over time, they evolved into something else, something organized, something systematic. Girls were recruited from the endless supply that Hollywood generated: aspiring actresses, models, runaways, immigrants. They were promised introductions, opportunities, the chance to meet people who could change their lives. Most of them attended a few parties, accepted some gifts, maybe slept with a few men, and moved on with their lives, damaged but functional. But some of them were selected for something more. "The Room," Jack said, looking up from the file. "That's what they call it. I've never been able to confirm exactly what happens there, but I have theories." Carter sat down heavily in a chair across from Jack. "The girls who get invited to the Room are the ones who have already proven they'll do anything. The ones who are desperate enough, or damaged enough, or ambitious enough to cross lines that most people won't cross. They're taken to a special location. I think it's in the Elysium House, but I'm not certain, and they're filmed doing things." "What kind of things?" "The kind that can't be undone, kind that would destroy them if the films ever got out." Carter took a long drink of bourbon. "But here's the thing, Dalton. The films aren't just about the girls. They're about the men, too. The men who attend these sessions are filmed right alongside the women. And once you're on film, once they have that leverage, they own you." "Exactly. It's a machine for manufacturing compliance. You want to be part of the club, you have to give them something they can use against you. And once they have it, you do whatever they say for the rest of your life." Jack thought about the names in the donor file: Kenyon, Reeves, Sinclair. Men at the top of their fields. Men with power and influence. Men who had everything to lose. Who runs it? Who's at the top? That's what I've never been able to figure out. There's always another layer, another shell company, another intermediary. Lomax handles the day-to-day operations, but he's not the boss. He's just the instrument. Then who is? I don't know. Maybe nobody knows. Maybe that's the point. Carter leaned forward, his eyes intense. "But I do know someone who might be able to help you. Photographer named Leon Sharp. He works the parties, takes pictures for the clients. Discreet stuff, supposedly, but I've heard rumors that he keeps copies of everything. A kind of insurance policy." "Where do I find him?" "He has a studio on Western, near Sunset. But be careful, Dalton. Sharp is connected. If he thinks you're a threat, he'll make a call, and then you'll have more problems than you can handle." Jack closed the folder and stood up. "I already have more problems than I can handle. One more won't make a difference." Leon Sharp's studio occupied the second floor of a building that had seen better days, peeling paint. A staircase that groaned with every step. The smell of chemicals drifting through poorly ventilated hallways. The door at the top said Sharp Photography in letters that had once been gold and were now just dirty. Jack knocked. After a moment, a voice called from inside. "We're closed." "I'm not here for photographs. I'm here for information." Silence. Then footsteps, and the sound of multiple locks being undone. The door opened to reveal a man in his 50s, thin and nervous, with the pallid complexion of someone who spent too much time in dark rooms. His eyes, when they met Jack's, held the particular wariness of a creature that had learned to expect predators. "Who are you?" Jack Dalton. "I am a private investigator. I'd like to ask you some questions about some parties you photographed." Sharp's face went through several expressions: fear, calculation, resignation, before settling on a kind of weary acceptance. "You better come in." The studio was larger than the hallway suggested, divided into sections by curtains and screens. The front area was set up for portrait work, lights, backdrops, the usual equipment. But it was the back area that interested Jack, the part hidden behind a heavy black curtain. Sharp saw him looking. "That's private. Client work. Nothing you need to see." "I think I do. And I think you should leave." Jack didn't move. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the photograph of Elizabeth Whitmore. "This girl, do you recognize her?" Sharp looked at the photograph. Something flickered in his eyes: recognition, definitely, and something else. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "I've taken pictures of a lot of girls. This one specifically. Her name is Elizabeth Whitmore. She went missing 9 months ago after attending some parties in the hills." "Parties I think you've photographed." "I photograph a lot of parties." "Mr. Sharp." Jack's voice hardened, taking on the edge he'd learned in 1,000 interrogations. "I'm not here to cause you trouble. I'm here to find out what happened to this girl. Her father hired me. He's a wealthy man, a connected man, and he's not going to stop looking until he has answers. Now you can help me, and I'll do my best to keep your name out of it, or you can stonewall me, and I'll start making your life very complicated." Sharp was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, shoulders slumping, and walked toward the back of the studio. "Come with me." Behind the black curtain was a different world. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, dozens of them, each one labeled with dates and locations. And beyond the cabinets, hanging from wires like laundry, were photographs, hundreds of them, thousands maybe, images of beautiful people in beautiful settings doing things that ranged from innocent to anything but. "I keep records," Sharp said, "of everything. It started as a business practice. Clients want copies, want reprints, want evidence that certain events happened or didn't happen. But over time, it became something else." "What?" "Insurance. In this town, information is currency. The people I work for, they think they own me because they pay me. But I know things about them that they wouldn't want known. As long as I have these files, I'm valuable. The moment I don't have them," he drew a finger across his throat, "show me the files on the Elysium parties." Sharp hesitated, then moved to one of the cabinets and pulled out a drawer. Inside were folders, each one labeled with a date. He selected one and handed it to Jack. "This is from about a year ago. One of the regular parties, not the special ones. Just the normal events, where men meet girls and everyone pretends it's about networking." Jack opened the folder. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, showing exactly what Sharp had described: a party at a large house, beautiful people in beautiful clothes, the careful choreography of seduction that Hollywood had perfected. And there, in the corner of one photograph, was Elizabeth Whitmore. She was smiling, drink in hand, talking to a man whose face was half turned from the camera. She looked happy, or at least she looked like she was performing happiness, which in this town was often the same thing. "Who's the man she's talking to?" Sharp looked at the photograph and went pale. "I can't tell you that." "Can't or won't?" "Can't, because if I tell you and he finds out I told you, I'm dead. Simple as that." Jack studied the photograph more closely. The man was tall, well-dressed, with gray hair and the kind of bearing that suggested authority. There was something familiar about him, something Jack couldn't quite place. "You said these were the regular parties. What about the special ones?" Sharp's face closed down. "I don't photograph those. But you know about them. Everyone knows about them. Nobody talks about them. That's how it works." "What happens at them?" "I told you I don't." "Mr. Sharp." Jack stepped closer, close enough to see the fear in the photographer's eyes. "I've already been warned off this case by Vincent Lomax. I've already sent my daughter into hiding because I'm afraid of what these people might do. I'm past the point of being careful. So either you tell me what you know, or I start talking to people about your little insurance collection here, and we see how long it takes before someone decides you're more trouble than you're worth." Sharp's hands were shaking now. He looked around the studio, at the files and photographs that represented his life's work and his only protection, and seemed to make a decision. The special parties are different. They're not about networking or introductions. They are about, he paused, searching for words, entertainment for a very select group of clients. What kind of entertainment? The kind that can't be described, the kind that leaves marks, kind that... Sharp swallowed hard. Some of the girls who go to those parties don't come back. Not because they're killed, necessarily, but because something happens to them there, something that breaks them, and they can't go back to being who they were before. And Elizabeth Whitmore, she went. I know because I saw her at the last regular party, and one of the other girls told me she'd been invited to something special. That was maybe 2 weeks before she disappeared. Sharp's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The girls who get invited to the special parties, they're the ones who have proven themselves, who have shown they'll do anything for a chance at success. Elizabeth was ambitious, too ambitious. She thought she could handle it. She couldn't. Nobody can. That's the point. Jack looked at the photograph in his hand, Elizabeth smiling, hopeful, 2 weeks away from something she couldn't imagine. "I need more," he said. "Names. Locations. Anything you can give me. I've told you too much already. You've told me enough to make me dangerous. Might as well tell me enough to make me useful." Sharp stood very still for a long moment, wrestling with something inside himself. Then he turned and walked to a different cabinet, one that was locked with a key he wore around his neck. "I lied," he said, as he opened it. "I do photograph the special parties. Not the worst parts they have someone else at, but the before and after, the arrivals, the departures, the faces of the people who attend." He pulled out a folder thinner than the others, but somehow heavier, and handed it to Jack. "This is everything I have. Dates, locations, faces. I don't know names, they're careful about that, but if you can identify the faces, you'll know who's behind this." Jack opened the folder. The photographs inside were different from the others, darker, more intimate, shot with a long lens from positions that suggested concealment. Faces of men arriving at a house. He recognized Elysium. Faces of girls being helped from vans, their expressions ranging from nervous to vacant, to something that looked like the absence of expression altogether. And in one photograph, a face that made Jack's blood run cold. He knew that face. Everyone in Los Angeles knew that face. It belonged to a man whose name was spoken with reverence in boardrooms and fear in back rooms. A man whose power extended so far that most people didn't even realize how much of their lives he controlled. Harold Kenyon, head of production at Paramount Pictures. The man who decided what movies got made and what stars got born. The man who was photographed at the entrance to Elysium, his hand on the arm of a girl who couldn't have been more than 17. "Jesus Christ," Jack said. "Now you understand," Sharp said. "Now you understand why people don't talk about this, why investigations get shut down, why girls disappear and nobody asks questions." He took the folder back from Jack's hands, his own hands trembling. "These people own the city, Belton. They own the police, the press, the courts. They own the machine that makes dreams, and they use it to make nightmares. And there's nothing you or I or anyone else can do to stop them. We'll see about that." "No, we won't, because you're going to take what I've told you, and you're going to walk away. You're going to go back to your client and tell him his daughter is gone, and there's nothing more you can do. And then you're going to forget you ever came here. I can't do that. Then you're going to die." Sharp's voice was flat now, resigned. "They killed one of my predecessors, you know, a photographer named Walsh. Worked the parties before me." He started asking questions, started thinking he could use what he knew. "They found him in the river 3 weeks later. Suicide, the police said. Very tragic, very convenient." Jack looked at the photographs one more time. Elizabeth's face, hopeful. Kenyon's face, predatory. The faces of dozens of other girls, their futures already written in the expressions they wore. "I need copies," he said. "Absolutely not. Mr. Sharp, I'm going to find out what happened to Elizabeth Whitmore, with or without your help. If you give me copies of these photographs, I have a chance of doing it without getting killed. If you don't, I'll have to find the evidence somewhere else. And that means more questions, more attention, more risk for both of us." Sharp hesitated. Jack could see the calculation happening, the weighing of risks, the assessment of probabilities, the desperate search for a path that didn't lead to destruction. "There's a girl," Sharp said finally. "She worked the parties for about a year before she got out. She knows things that aren't in any photographs. If you want to understand what really happens at Elysium, talk to her." "What's her name?" "Marie Santos. She's living in San Pedro now, working as a waitress. She got out, but she didn't get away clean. The things she saw, they stay with you." Jack committed the name to memory. "And the photographs?" Sharp reached into the folder and withdrew 3 prints. The image of Kenya, the image of the arriving girls, and one other that showed a man Jack didn't recognize standing at what looked like a doorway. "This is all I can give you. The rest stays here, or I'm as dead as you're going to be." Jack took the photographs. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Just do what you're going to do and keep my name out of it. I've survived this long by being invisible. I'd like to stay that way." Jack walked out of the studio with the photographs in his pocket and a name burning in his mind. Marie Santos, a survivor, someone who had been inside and come back out. He needed to find her before anyone else did. Chapter 9. The list. Jack spent the next 3 days building a picture. He started with the photographs Sharp had given him, cross-referencing the faces with every database he could access. The man at the doorway was identified through a contact at the Times, Gerald Hoffman, a lawyer who specialized in entertainment law and whose client was to read like a who's who of Hollywood power. Hoffman was a fixer, like Jack, but operating at a level so far above that they might as well have been different professions. He was also, according to the records Jack found, the registered agent for no fewer than 6 shell companies connected to the Pacific Cultural Foundation. The web was becoming clearer. Kenyon at the top, providing protection and access. Hoffman handling the legal arrangements, the paper trails, the plausible deniability. Lomax managing operations, the day-to-day running of an enterprise that consumed girls and produced power. But there were still gaps, still questions that needed answering. Jack went back to the files on Elizabeth Whitmore, looking for connections he might have missed. He called Helen Marchetti again, asked her about the other girls Elizabeth had mentioned, the ones who attended the parties. Helen gave him 4 names, 3 of whom had left town and one of whom had disappeared entirely. The one who disappeared was named Alice Chen, 20 years old, aspiring actress, last seen 8 months ago, 2 weeks before Elizabeth. Jack pulled her missing persons report. It was a single page, barely filled out, closed after a week with the notation believed to have left the city voluntarily. The investigating officer was Detective Paulson, the same detective who had closed Elizabeth's case. Jack started looking for other cases. He went through the LOPD files, the ones he could access through contacts who still owed him favors, and pulled every missing persons report from the past 3 years involving young women between 18 and 20. 5 who had come to Los Angeles to work in entertainment. There were 47 of them. 47 girls who had arrived in the city with dreams and disappeared without explanation. Some of them had been found in other cities, in other states, alive and trying to forget what had happened. But many of them hadn't been found at all. They were just gone, swallowed by a city that was too big and too indifferent to notice their absence. Jack spent a day cross-referencing the cases with Sharp's photographs, with the party lists, with everything he'd gathered on Elysium and its operations. By the time he was finished, he had a list of 12 names, 12 girls who had attended the parties at Elysium and subsequently vanished without a trace. Elizabeth Whitmore was one of them. Alice Chen was another. The others had names that meant nothing to anyone, and more girls without families who cared enough to keep looking. without friends who were willing to ask questions, without anyone at all who would notice that they were gone. Jack sat in his apartment, looking at the list, feeling the weight of it settle into his chest. 12 girls, maybe more, chewed up by a machine that existed to satisfy the appetites of powerful men, disposed of when they were no longer useful, forgotten by a city that had never known they existed. He thought about Elizabeth's father waiting in his hotel room for news that would never be good enough. He thought about the other families, the ones who didn't have money, didn't have connections, didn't have anyone to hire a private investigator and demand answers. He thought about Lily. Phone rang. Mr. Dalton? The voice was female, hesitant. This is Marie Santos. Leon Sharp gave me your number. He said you wanted to talk to me. Jack sat up straighter. I do. Can we meet? I'm scared, Mr. Dalton. Been scared for a year now, ever since I got out. I don't want to go back to that life. I don't want them to find me. I understand. There are things I need to know. Things that might help me stop them from doing to other girls what they did to you. Silence on the line. Jack could hear her breathing, could feel her fear coming through the wire. There's a diner in San Pedro, she said finally. The Harbor Light. I'll be there tomorrow at noon. If I see anyone following you, I'm gone. If I think you're working for them, I'm gone. Do you understand? I understand. I hope so, Mr. Dalton. Because the people you're asking about, they don't forgive and they don't forget. And if they find out I'm talking to you, they'll kill us both. The line went dead. Jack sat in the silence of his apartment, looking at the list of 12 names, and wondered how many more names there would be before this was over. Chapter 10. The house. Before meeting Marie, Jack needed to see Elysium for himself. He drove up to Laurel Canyon at 3 in the morning, when the city was at its quietest, and the rich were sleeping behind their walls. The roads were empty, winding through darkness that felt absolute, the kind of darkness that expensive neighborhoods paid for by keeping the streetlights dim. The house was exactly as he'd seen it through binoculars, Spanish colonial, 3 stories, set back from the road behind a gate that promised security, but wouldn't stop anyone who really wanted to get in. Jack parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, staying in the shadows, moving the way he'd learned to move a long time ago when he was still a cop and still believed that the law meant something. The gate was the obvious obstacle. It was electronic, controlled by a keypad and monitored by a camera that swept the approach in regular intervals. Jack watched the camera for 10 minutes, timing its rotation, identifying the blind spots. There was a gap, not much, maybe 3 seconds every 30. 7 seconds, but enough for someone who knew what he was doing. He went over the wall to the east of the gate, where a stand of oleander provided cover. The wall was 8 feet high, topped with decorative ironwork that looked pretty and would be hell to climb. Jack managed it anyway, dropping into a garden that smelled of jasmine and corruption. The grounds were extensive manicured lawns, a pool that glittered under starlight, outbuildings that might have been guest houses or might have been something else. Jack moved through them carefully, keeping to the shadows, watching for guards or dogs or any sign that the house was occupied. It wasn't, or if it was, whoever was inside wasn't showing themselves. The main house was dark, its windows reflecting nothing. Jack circled it, looking for a way in, and found what he was looking for at the back service entrance, the kind that caterers and staff would use, with a lock that was good but not good enough. He was inside in 30 seconds. The house was decorated with a kind of studied elegance that money could buy, but taste couldn't always guide. Art on the walls that was probably valuable, furniture that was probably antique, everything arranged to project wealth and power and the particular confidence that came from having both. Jack moved through the rooms systematically, looking for anything that might connect to Elizabeth Whitmore or the operation that had consumed her. He found a study with locked filing cabinets, a dining room that could seat 40, a kitchen that was industrial in scale and sterile in cleanliness. And then he found the stairs that led down. The basement was different. The aesthetic changed at the bottom of the stairs, the polished wood and Persian carpets giving way to concrete and industrial lighting. The space was divided into sections by heavy curtains, the kind that blocked not just sight but sound. Jack pushed through the first curtain. The room beyond was equipped like a film studio: lights, cameras, reflectors arranged around a central space that contained a bed with metal rails and restraints that were decorative. The walls were padded with something that looked like soundproofing. The floor was concrete, stained in places with something dark that might have been wine and probably wasn't. Jack stood very still, feeling the weight of the space pressing down on him. This was the room. This was where the girls were brought. This was where things happened that couldn't be undone. He forced himself to move, to examine the equipment, to look for evidence he could use. The cameras were high-end, professional grade, connected to a recording system that was hidden behind a panel on the wall. Jack opened the panel and found a cabinet filled with film canisters, each one labeled with a date and a number. No names, just dates and numbers. The girls had been reduced to inventory. Jack selected 3 canisters at random and put them in his jacket. Then he kept looking. Behind another curtain was a smaller room, furnished with a desk and chairs and the accoutrements of an office. There were files here, paper files, the old-fashioned kind, and Jack went through them quickly, looking for anything that might help. What he found was a ledger. It was handwritten, entries going back years, documenting transactions that were described in a kind of code. Dates, locations, numbers that might have been dollar amounts or might have been something else, and occasionally initials that might have corresponded to names. Jack took the ledger. He was on his way back to the stairs when he heard the sound of a door opening somewhere above. Footsteps on the floor, voices murmuring in conversation. Someone was in the house. Jack pressed himself against the wall, hand on his gun, heart hammering in his chest. The footsteps moved through the rooms above. 2 people, maybe 3, their voices too low to make out words. They were searching for something, or checking on something, or maybe just making sure the house was secure. They didn't come down to the basement. After 10 minutes that felt like hours, the footsteps receded. A door closed. An engine started outside and drove away. Jack waited another 5 minutes, then made his way back through the house, out the service entrance, across the garden, over the wall. He was in his car and driving down the canyon road before his hands stopped shaking. He had the films. He had the ledger. He had evidence that would prove what was happening at Elysium. Now he had to figure out what to do with it. Chapter 11. The Survivor. The Harbor Light Diner was the kind of place that tourists never found and locals had been coming to for decades. The booths were cracked vinyl. The coffee was strong and bitter, and the waitress who poured it looked like she'd heard every story there was and had stopped being surprised by any of them. Marie Santos was already there when Jack arrived, sitting in a booth at the back with her back to the wall and her eyes on the door. She was 24 years old, dark-haired and dark-eyed, with the kind of beauty that Hollywood would have called exotic if Hollywood thought about the girls it consumed as anything other than raw material. She looked older than 24. She looked like she'd seen things that had aged her from the inside out. Mr. Dalton. Her voice was flat, controlled. Thank you for coming along. Thank you for meeting me. Jack slid into the booth across from her and ordered coffee. The waitress brought it and left without comment. Leon said you're investigating the Whitmore girl, Marie said. He said you're not going to stop, no matter what anyone tells you. That's right. Why? What's she to you? Jack thought about the question. He could have given her the professional answer. He'd been hired. He had a client. He did what he was paid to do. But something about this woman, about the damage in her eyes, demanded more than that. She looks like my daughter, he said. My daughter is 8 years old. Elizabeth Whitmore is what my daughter might become in 15 years, if the wrong people get a hold of her. I can't let that happen. Not to Lily. Not to anyone. Marie studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, because some of the tension went out of her shoulders. I'll tell you what I know, she said. But first you need to understand something. The people who run Elysium, they're not criminals. Not in the way you think of criminals. They're businessmen. They run an operation that provides a service, and they're very good at what they do. They've been doing it for years, maybe decades, and they've never been caught. They've never been investigated properly. They've been investigated plenty. The investigations go nowhere, because the people doing the investigating are either bought or scared or both. She took a sip of her coffee, her hands steady despite everything. I got into this the way everyone gets into it. I came to Hollywood to be an actress. I was pretty enough to get noticed, not talented enough to break through. After a year of failed auditions and bit parts, a man approached me. He said he could introduce me to people who could help my career. Richard Crane? You know him? We've met. Then you know what he is. A recruiter. A pander. He finds girls who are desperate enough to do what the men want, and he brings them to the parties. The first few parties are harmless drinking, flirting, maybe going home with someone. You tell yourself it's networking. You tell yourself everyone does it. But it's not just networking. No, after a few parties, if they like you, you get invited to something more exclusive. A private gathering. They call it a salon, like it's something sophisticated. But it's not sophisticated. It's, you pause, searching for words. It's an audition. They're watching you, evaluating you, deciding if you're suitable for the next level. The room. Marie's face went very still. You know about the room. I have seen it. Last night, I broke into Elysium. Something that might have been respect flickered in her eyes. Then you've seen where they take us. But you haven't seen what happens there. Tell me. I can't. Not because I don't want to, because I can't. The words don't exist for what happens in that room. They drug you first. Something in the drinks. Something that makes you compliant. Makes you forget parts of what happens. But you remember enough. You remember the lights. The cameras. The men watching. You remember being told to do things, and doing them because you're too far gone to refuse. You remember. Her voice broke. She stopped, breathed, continued. You remember waking up the next day with marks on your body that you don't remember getting, and you remember knowing that somewhere there's a film of everything you did, and that film belongs to them now. The films are leverage. The films are everything. They own you after that. You can't go to the police, because they'll release the film and destroy you. You can't tell anyone, because who would believe you? You're just another Hollywood girl who made bad choices. You're just another casualty of the dream factory. But you got out. I got out because I got lucky. One of the men who attended the parties, I won't tell you his name, but he was different from the others. He had a conscience, or what passed for one. He saw what was happening to me, and he helped me disappear. New name, new city, new life. She shook her head. But I'm not really out. None of us are. As long as those films exist, they own us. Forever. Jack thought about the film canisters in his apartment. The ledger with its coded entries. Evidence of everything Marie was describing. Evidence that could bring down the people responsible. What about the girls who don't get out? He asked. The ones who disappear completely. Marie's face went pale. Some of them leave town. The operation helps them go. Gives them money, sets them up somewhere far away. It's better for everyone that way. The girls are gone. The secrets are kept. Nobody asks questions. And the others? I don't know. Her voice was barely a whisper now. There were rumors. Girls who fought back, who threatened to talk, who became problems. The rumors said those girls were handled differently. The rumors said... She stopped, unable to continue. The rumors said they didn't leave town. They just disappeared. Marie nodded. Elizabeth Whitmore was one of those girls, wasn't she? I don't know for certain, but I knew her. Not well, but well enough. She was smart, ambitious, the kind of girl who thought she could beat them at their own game. She asked questions, pushed boundaries, tried to gather information that might protect her. The last time I saw her, she told me she was going to get proof of what they were doing. Proof that would bring them down. Did she get it? I don't know. 2 weeks later, she was gone. Jack sat back in the booth, processing everything Marie had told him. The picture was clearer now. The operation, the leverage, the systematic destruction of young women who had come to Los Angeles looking for dreams and found nightmares instead. But it was still incomplete. He still didn't know who was really in charge. He still didn't know what had happened to Elizabeth. And he still didn't know if the evidence he'd gathered would be enough to bring them down. Thank you, he said, for telling me this. I know it wasn't easy. Easy has nothing to do with it. I told you because I want them to pay for what they did. To me, to Elizabeth, to all the girls they've destroyed. Marie leaned forward, her eyes intense. But Mr. Bolton, you need to understand what you're up against. These men have been doing this for years. They've survived investigations, scandals, everything that's been thrown at them. They have the police in their pocket, the press in their pocket, the courts in their pocket. You can't beat them by playing their game. Then how do I beat them? Marie was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was hard. You burn them, not to house them. You find the evidence that they can't suppress, the proof that can't be denied, and you put it somewhere they can't reach, somewhere public, somewhere permanent. You make it impossible for anyone to pretend they didn't know. That's what I'm planning to do. Then I hope you succeed, because if you fail, she stood up, gathering her coat. If you fail, you'll end up like Elizabeth, like all the other girls who thought they could fight back. She walked out of the diner without looking back. Jack sat alone in the booth, drinking his cold coffee, thinking about everything she'd said. He had the films, he had the ledger, he had testimony from a survivor who could confirm what had happened. Now he had to figure out how to use it all without getting himself killed. Chapter 12. The Room. Jack spent 3 days preparing. He rented a safe deposit box at a bank in Glendale and put copies of everything inside the photographs, the ledger, detailed notes on everyone he'd spoken to. He gave a key to Ben Carter with instructions to open the box and publish everything if something happened to Jack. You're serious about this? Carter said, turning the key over in his hands. I'm serious about not disappearing without a trace. If they get to me, I want the world to know why. He called Whitmore and gave him a progress report, careful to share enough to maintain his confidence without revealing the full scope of what Jack had discovered. The old man listened in silence, his breathing heavy on the line. You're saying my daughter is dead? I'm saying she's gone. Whether that means dead, I can't say for certain. But the people who took her aren't the kind who leave loose ends. Who are they? Give me names. Not yet. Not until I have enough evidence to make the names stick. But soon, Mr. Whitmore. Soon. He hung up the phone and got to work on the next phase. The films he'd taken from Elysium were 16 millimeter, professional quality. He needed equipment to view them, which meant finding someone he could trust with something that could destroy both of them if it got into the wrong hands. He found a projectionist named Eddie Malone, a man who had worked for the studios for 30 years and had seen enough during that time to be unshockable. Eddie owed Jack a favor from years back, something about a gambling debt, and the kind of men who collected such debts with baseball bats, and he agreed to let Jack use his home projection setup after hours. I don't want to know what's on those films, Eddie said, as he threaded the first canister into the projector. Whatever it is, I'm going to forget I ever saw it. That's probably why. The projector hummed to life. The wall became a screen. Jack watched. The first film was dated 18 months ago. It showed the room. The one Jack had stood in 2 nights earlier, lit for cameras, staged like a film set. A girl was brought in by 2 men whose faces were carefully kept out of frame. She was young, blonde, pretty in a generic way that Hollywood mass-produced. She was also clearly drugged. Her movements slow and uncoordinated, her eyes glazed. What happened next was exactly what Marie had described. Jack watched it all, forcing himself not to look away, documenting every detail in his memory. The men who participated were older, wealthy-looking, their faces sometimes visible and sometimes not. The girl was compliant in the way that only heavy sedation could produce. When it was over, the screen went white. Jack's hands were shaking. Jesus Christ. Eddie whispered from somewhere behind him. Jesus Christ, Dalton, what is this? Evidence. The second film was more of the same, different girl, different man, the same systematic degradation. Jack recognized one of the faces. Walter Reed, the city councilman, his features sought with a pleasure that would destroy his career if this ever became public. The third film was Elizabeth Whitmore. She was different from the others, less compliant, more aware. Whatever they'd given her hadn't fully taken hold, and she was struggling against the hands that held her. her face contorted with fear and rage. The men seemed to find this entertaining. They laughed as they worked, their voices clear on the soundtrack. She's a fighter, this one. They all fight at first. They learn. Maybe we should teach her a lesson. What followed was worse than the other films. Worse because Elizabeth was conscious for most of it. Worse because she knew what was happening and couldn't stop it. Worse because, at the end, when she was lying motionless on that bed, one of the men leaned down and said something that the microphone barely picked up. That's enough for tonight. Take her to the desert. Make sure she's not found. The film ended. Jack sat in the darkness, staring at the blank wall, feeling something inside him shift and harden into resolution. Turn it off, he said. Turn it all off. Eddie killed the projector. The room was dark and silent. What are you going to do? Eddie asked. I'm going to destroy them. How? These people, they're untouchable. You saw the faces. That's Reeves on there. God knows who else. They own this city. Nobody owns everything. Jack stood up, gathering the film canisters, handling them like the weapons they were. They made a mistake, Eddie. They filmed themselves. They created evidence, and evidence can be used. Used how? You take this to the cops. They'll bury you. You take it to the papers. They'll kill you before it prints. Then I won't take it to the cops, and I won't give the papers time to be threatened. Jack's voice was flat, certain. I'm going to do what they do. I'm going to use leverage. I'm going to make them understand that if anything happens to me, if they try to stop me, everything comes out. Everything. And then I'm going to burn them down. He walked out of Eddie's house with the films under his arm, the night air cool on his face, his mind already working through the next steps. Elizabeth Whitmore was dead. The film confirmed it. But her death could still mean something. Could still be the weapon that brought down the men who had killed her. Jack was going to make sure of that. Chapter 13. The Films. The next morning, Jack called Charles Whitmore. They met at Whitmore's hotel, the Beverly Wilshire, because a man like Whitmore didn't stay anywhere less. The suite was enormous, decorated in the kind of understated elegance that old money preferred, with windows that looked out over a city that seemed impossibly bright in the afternoon sun. Whitmore was standing by those windows when Jack arrived. He looked older than he had 2 weeks ago, the grief wearing grooves into his face that hadn't been there before. You've found something, he said. It wasn't a question. I found what happened to your daughter. Jack told him. Not everything. There were details that no father should ever hear, but enough. He told him about the parties, about the room, about the films that were made, and the leverage that was gained. He told him that Elizabeth had been taken to the desert, that she was almost certainly dead, that the men responsible were among the most powerful in Los Angeles. Whitmore listened in silence. His face didn't change, didn't crack, didn't reveal anything of what was happening behind his eyes. When Jack was finished, he turned back to the window and stood very still for a long moment. Who? He asked finally. Who is responsible? I have names. Harold Kenyon at Paramount, Walter Reeves on the city council, Arthur Sinclair, the industrialist, others probably, whose faces I didn't recognize on the films, and a man named Vincent Lomax who handles their dirty work. Can you prove it? I have films. I have a ledger with coded transactions. I have testimony from a survivor. It's enough to destroy them if it gets out. The question is how to get it out without being killed first. Whitmore turned from the window. His eyes were dry, but there was something in them that Jack recognized, the cold determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. My daughter is dead, he said. Nothing will bring her back. But the men who killed her are still breathing, still living their comfortable lives, still doing to other girls what they did to Elizabeth. I want that to stop. So do I. Then tell me what you need. Money, resources, connections, whatever it takes. I didn't build a fortune by being timid, Mr. Dalton, and I'm not going to sit in this hotel room while the men who murdered my daughter walk free. Jack thought about it. He had the evidence. He had a journalist willing to publish. What he didn't have was protection, a way to make sure that the story came out even if they got to him first. I need distribution, he said. The evidence needs to go to multiple places at once: newspapers, federal authorities, maybe someone in Washington who can't be bought by Hollywood money. It needs to happen fast, before they have time to suppress it, and it needs to happen publicly, so there's no chance of it being buried. I can arrange that. I have contacts in New York, in Washington, people who owe me favors, people who would love to see Harold Kenyon destroyed. Whitmore's voice was cold now, analytical. How long do you need? A week, maybe less. I need to make copies of everything, set up the distribution channels, make sure there are no gaps they can exploit. You'll have whatever you need. Money, security, anything. There's one more thing. Jack hesitated, then pushed forward. The films are explicit. What was done to your daughter is documented. Every terrible moment. If this comes out, everyone will see it. Everyone will know. Whitmore's jaw tightened. I understand. Are you sure? Because once it's out there, it can't be taken back. Your daughter's degradation will be public knowledge. Her name will be associated with this forever. Her name will be associated with bringing down the men who killed her. Whitmore's voice cracked, just slightly, before he brought it back under control. She came to the city to be a star, Mr. Dalton. She wanted to be remembered. Maybe this isn't how she imagined it, but if her death can save other girls from what happened to her, if her story can bring down the monsters who prey on young women, then at least she'll have mattered. At least her life will have meant something. Jack nodded. He understood that kind of thinking. He'd used it himself, to justify things that might otherwise have been unjustifiable. Then we move forward. I'll have everything ready within a week. When it's time, I'll let you know. They shook hands. Whitmore's grip was firm, but there was a tremor in it that betrayed the grief he was holding at bay. Find them, Whitmore said. Find all of them, and make them pay. I will. Jack left the hotel and walked into the Los Angeles afternoon. The sun was bright, the sky was blue, and somewhere in the hills above the city, men were living their comfortable lives, unaware that their world was about to come crashing down. He had 1 week to assemble the weapon that would destroy them. He got to work. Chapter 14. The call. The week that followed was the most intense of Jack's life. He made copies of everything, multiple copies, stored in different locations, distributed to different people with different instructions. Then Carter got a full set with orders to publish if Jack didn't check in every 24 hours. Whitmore's contacts in New York and Washington received packages with covering letters that explained the contents and provided context. A lawyer Jack trusted, one of the few honest men he knew, was given sealed documents to be opened in the event of Jack's death. The net was cast wide. If they tried to suppress the story in one place, they would pop up in another. If they tried to kill Jack, the evidence would be released automatically. There was no way to stop it, no way to contain it. The machine that had operated in darkness for so long was about to be dragged into the light. On the 6th day, Jack's phone rang. Mr. Dalton. Vincent Lomax's voice was as calm as ever. I was hoping we might speak. I'm listening. Not over the phone. There's a park in Griffith, you know the one. The overlook above the Greek Theater. Be there in an hour. Why do that? Because I have information you want, and because I'm offering you a chance to walk away from this intact. 1 hour, Mr. Dalton. The line went dead. Jack sat very still, weighing his options. It could be a trap, almost certainly was a trap, but Lomax had some angle Jack hadn't considered, and in a game this complex, any piece of information could be decisive. He checked his gun, made sure his copies were in order, and drove to Griffith Park. Lomax was waiting at the overlook, standing at the railing with his back to the city spread out below. He turned when Jack approached, his face as unreadable as ever. Thank you for coming. Talk fast. Very well. Lomax clasped his hands behind his back, a gesture that might have been meant to show he was unarmed. I know what you've been doing, Mr. Dalton. The copies you've made, the people you've contacted, the net you've been weaving, is impressive. Truly, you've put together a case that could destroy a great many powerful people. That's the idea. Yes, but here's what you don't understand. The people I work for have been dealing with threats like yours for decades. They've survived scandals that would have buried anyone else. They have resources you can't imagine, political, financial, personal. If you release what you have, they'll be hurt badly. Some of them might even go to prison, but they won't be destroyed. Not completely. And the ones who survive will come for you. I can protect myself. No, you can't. Not against what they'll do. Lomax turned to face him fully, and there was something in his eyes that might have been genuine concern. They'll come for your ex-wife. They'll come for your daughter. They'll make you watch while they do to Lily what they did to Elizabeth Whitmore, and then they'll kill you both, and no one will ever be punished for it. That's the reality of what you're facing. Jack felt the cold spread through his chest, the same cold that had been there since he first saw Elizabeth's photograph. Is that a threat? It's a warning. I'm trying to save your life, Mr. Bolton, and the lives of the people you love. Lomax stepped closer. There's another way. Walk away now. Give me everything you've gathered, the films, the ledger, copies, everything. In exchange, I'll guarantee your safety and the safety of your family. You'll never hear from us again. You can go back to your life, such as it is, and pretend none of this ever happened. And Elizabeth Whitmore is dead. Nothing you do will bring her back. But your daughter is alive. Your daughter can still be saved. Jack looked at Lomax, at his calm face, his reasonable voice, and felt something shift inside him. You're wrong, he said. About what? About what I'm willing to accept. Jack stepped closer, close enough to see the subtle shift in Lomax's expression as he realized the answer wasn't going to be what he wanted. I spent the last 2 weeks looking at photographs of dead girls who came to this city with hope in their hearts and ended up in pieces in the desert. I've watched films of things that no human being should ever see, let alone do to another person. I've talked to survivors who will never recover from what was done to them. And through all of it, I've been thinking about my daughter, about what the city could do to her if the wrong people got their hands on her. All the more reason to walk away. No, all the more reason to burn it down. Jack's voice was steady now, certain. You're right, I can't destroy them completely. But I can hurt them. I can expose them. I can make it impossible for them to operate the way they have been. And maybe I can save some of the girls who would have been next. And your daughter? You're willing to risk her life for this? My daughter is in San Diego. She's safe. And by the time you could get to her, the evidence will be everywhere. You'll have bigger problems than revenge. Lomax was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, as if confirming something he had suspected all along. You're a brave man, Mr. Bolton. I said that before, and I meant it. But bravery won't protect you from what's coming. Maybe not, but it's all I have. Lomax turned and walked toward a black sedan parked at the edge of the overlook. He paused at the door and looked back. 24 hours, he said. That's how long you have before we respond. Use them well. He got in the car and drove away. Jack stood alone at the overlook, looking out at the city he had loved and hated in equal measure, thinking about everything that had led him to this moment. 24 hours. It would have to be enough. He drove back to the city and made the calls that would start the fire. End of Part 2. The Room. Part 3. The Society. Chapter 15. The Names. The morning after Jack's meeting with Lomax, the first packages arrived at their destinations. Then Carter received his at 6 a.m. a thick manila envelope containing copies of everything, along with a letter that laid out the story in terms a journalist could understand. By 7, he was on the phone with his editor, explaining what he had and demanding space in the next day's paper. By 8, he was in a conference room with the paper's lawyers, going through the evidence piece by piece. In New York, a federal prosecutor named Thomas Brennan, one of Whitmore's contacts, a man who had made his career going after organized crime, opened a similar package over breakfast. What he found inside kept him at his kitchen table for 3 hours, reading and rereading, his coffee growing cold as the implications sank in. In Washington, a senator on the Judiciary Committee received a hand-delivered envelope from a courier who waited until it was signed for and then disappeared. The senator was known for his crusades against moral corruption in Hollywood. The envelope gave him enough ammunition for a decade of hearings. By noon, the machinery was in motion. Phone calls were made. Meetings were scheduled. Preparations began for what everyone involved understood would be the biggest scandal in Hollywood history. Jack spent the morning waiting. He'd done everything he could do. Now the story had to take on a life of its own. He sat in his apartment with his gun on the table, watching the door, expecting at any moment the knock that would signal the end. It didn't come. At 2 o'clock his phone rang. It's Carter. We're going to press tomorrow. Front page, above the fold. Paramount executive implicated in vice ring. The lawyers cleared it an hour ago. What about the films? We can't publish those, you know that. But we can describe them. We can name the people who appear in them. And we can print the photographs Sharp gave you. Carter's voice was tight with the excitement that bordered on fear. This is going to be huge, Dalton. This is going to change everything. Or it's going to get us both killed. Maybe, but either way, the story gets out. The copies you made, they're everywhere now. Even if they silence us, they can't silence everyone. Jack hung up the phone, then sat in silence of his apartment, thinking about tomorrow. By this time tomorrow, the world would know about Elysium, about the room, about the systematic destruction of young women by men who had considered themselves untouchable. By this time tomorrow, everything would be different. He hoped it would be enough. That evening, he drove to San Diego. The drive took 3 hours, south through Orange County and past Camp Pendleton, the ocean appearing and disappearing on his left as the road wound through coastal hills. He arrived at Margaret's sister's house just after sunset, parking down the street and walking the last 100 yards on foot. Margaret was waiting for him on the porch. Her face was hard, but there was something else behind the hardness, fear, maybe, or exhaustion. "She's asleep," Margaret said. "I told her you were coming. She wanted to wake up, but let her sleep. I just wanted to see her, make sure she's okay." They stood in silence for a moment. The gulf between them as wide as ever. "Is it almost over?" Margaret asked. "Almost. Tomorrow. Maybe the day after. The story breaks. The evidence gets to the people who can use it. And then," he trailed off, unsure how to finish. "And then what? You think these people are just going to disappear? You think they're going to accept defeat gracefully? I think they're going to have bigger problems than revenge. When this comes out, they'll be fighting for their lives. They won't have time to worry about me. You hope. I hope." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I never wanted this, you know. When we got divorced, I thought I hoped that you'd find some way to live a normal life, get a job that didn't involve criminals and violence, be the father Lily deserves. I tried. Did you? Or did you just find another version of the same thing?" She shook her head. "You're addicted to it, Jack. The danger, the righteousness, the feeling that you're the only one who can make things right. It's a drug, and you can't quit." Jack didn't argue. There wasn't any point. She was right, and they both knew it. "Can I see her? Just for a minute. I will wake her." Margaret hesitated, then nodded. "Be quiet." He followed her into the house, to a living room cluttered with the debris of a family visit, down the hallway to a small bedroom at the back. The door was slightly open, and through it Jack could see his daughter, asleep in a bed that was too big for her. Her blonde hair spread across the pillow like a halo. He stood in the doorway and watched her breathe. 8 years old, a lifetime ahead of her, a world he was trying to make safer, even though he knew he might never see her grow up in it. "I loved him," he whispered, too quiet for anyone to hear. Then he turned and walked away. Chapter 16. The Journalist. This story broke at 6 a.m. on a Thursday. The Los Angeles Times ran it across the front page, just as Carter had promised, 3 columns above the fold, with a photograph of Harold Kenyon at a Paramount premiere and a headline that would end careers. Paramount executive linked to Vice operation. Films of prominent citizens seized. By 9 a.m., the story had been picked up by every major paper in the country. By noon, it was on the radio, the television networks, the wire services that fed news to every corner of the world. The name Elysium, which had been known only to those who attended its parties, became a synonym for corruption, depravity, and the rot at the heart of Hollywood's golden age. Harold Kenyon was arrested at his Paramount office at 10 o'clock, led out in handcuffs past a crowd of reporters and photographers who captured every moment for posterity. Walter Reeves resigned his counsel seat by 11, releasing a statement that claimed innocence while admitting nothing. Arthur Sinclair vanished entirely, his whereabouts unknown, his assets already being seized by federal authorities. The machine that had operated in darkness for so long was finally being dragged into the light. Jack watched it all from his apartment, the television flickering with images of men he had helped to destroy. He felt nothing, no triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow emptiness that seemed to grow larger with each passing hour. The phone rang constantly, reporters wanting interviews, police wanting statements, people he'd never met wanting to congratulate him on a job well done. He let the calls go unanswered, sitting in his chair, watching the parade of destruction on the screen. At 3 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Jack picked up his gun and moved to the side of the entrance, staying out of the line of fire. "Who is it?" "Morty Glass." "Open up, Dalton." Jack opened the door. His former handler at Continental stood in the hallway, looking older than Jack had ever seen him. The usual sharpness was gone from his eyes. In its place was something that might have been fear. "Can I come in?" Jack stepped aside. Morty walked into the apartment and looked around, taking in the television, the newspapers spread across the table, the evidence of a man who had spent the day watching the world change. "Friends had to fire you," Morty said. Officially, Continental Pictures has no association with Jack Dalton. Never employed anyone by that name. Doesn't know anything about any investigation into any vice operation. Unofficially, he paused, running a hand through his thinning hair. Unofficially, I've been told to make sure you understand that your services are no longer required, and that any attempt to contact the studio will be met with legal action. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not sure you do. Morty's voice dropped. Kenyon was one of our investors, not directly through a shell company. Like everything else, but the money was there. When this story broke, half our board went into crisis mode. They're terrified, Jack. Terrified that someone's going to connect the dots, find out that Continental was part of this, bring the whole studio down. Was Continental part of this? I don't know. God help me, I really don't know. I thought I understood how this town worked. But this... He gestured at the television, where a reporter was describing the contents of the films in terms that would have been unthinkable a day ago. This is beyond anything I imagined. Jack looked at the man he'd worked for, the man who had given him assignments and approved his expenses, and pretended not to know where the bodies were buried. He felt a sudden, unexpected sympathy. Go home, Morty. Hug your wife. Tell your kids you love them, and stay as far away from this as you can. Morty nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but couldn't find the words. Then he turned and walked out, closing the door behind him. Jack was alone again. He sat down and watched the television, waiting for whatever came next. Chapter 17. The Pressure. The arrests continued for 3 days. Vincent Lomax was picked up by federal agents at a private airfield, trying to board a plane to Mexico. Gerald Hoffman, the lawyer, was found dead in his office of what the coroner would later rule a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Richard Crane turned state's evidence, trading everything he knew for a reduced sentence that would still keep him in prison for the next 15 years. The Pacific Cultural Foundation was dismantled, its assets seized, its records subpoenaed by a grand jury that seemed determined to leave no stone unturned. The house called Elysium was raided, photographed, documented in detail that would later form the core of a prosecution that would send the dozen men to prison. And through it all, Jack waited for the other shoe to drop. It came on the 4th day, in the form of a phone call from San Diego. Jack. Margaret's voice was taut with controlled panic. There was a man here, at the house. He didn't say anything, didn't do anything, just stood across the street and watched for an hour. Then he got in his car and drove away. What did he look like? Tall, well-dressed, Gray hair. He was carrying something at Kemah, maybe. He took pictures. Jack's blood went cold. The description matched too many men to be certain, but the message was clear. Take Lily and go. Right now. Don't tell me where. Don't tell anyone. Just take her and disappear. Jack, what's happening? I thought you said it was over. It's not over. It's never going to be over. He was pacing now, his mind racing through possibilities. These people, they don't forget. They don't forgive. I thought the exposure would protect us. But they're going to come anyway. They have to. It's the only way they keep control. Control of what? Half of them are in prison. Not all of them. There are others. There are always others. The ones who stayed clean, who never appeared on film, who were smart enough to keep their distance. Jack stopped pacing, his hand tight on the phone. Get Lily out, Margaret. That's all that matters now. Get her out and keep her safe. The line was silent for a long moment. I hate you for this, Margaret said finally. I hate what you've done to us, what you've brought into our lives. Lily deserves a father who protects her, not one who puts her in danger. I know. Do you? Because I don't think you do. I don't think you understand what you've cost us. I understand. Better than you know. Jack's voice was quiet, stripped of everything but truth. I love her more than anything in the world. Everything I've done, everything has been to make the world safer for her. But you're right. I failed. I thought I could fight them and win, and I was wrong. Then what do we do? You run. You take Lily and you run, and you don't stop running until I tell you it's safe. I'll handle things here. I'll find a way to end this. How? I don't know, but I'll find a way. He hung up the phone and stood in the silence of his apartment, feeling the weight of his choices pressing down on him. 4 days ago, he thought he was winning. He thought the exposure would be enough, that the scandal would consume them and leave nothing behind. He'd been wrong. The machine was bigger than he'd imagined, and it was still grinding, still consuming, still demanding its price. And the price, he was beginning to understand, was going to be higher than he'd ever imagined. Chapter 18. Lily. Jack spent the next week in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the blow that he knew was coming. Margaret called twice, once from Arizona, once from somewhere in Colorado. She and Lily were moving constantly, never staying in one place for more than a night, paying cash, using fake names that Jack had provided. It was no way to live, but it was better than the alternative. The trials began with preliminary hearings that dominated the news. Kenyon, Reeves, Sinclair, their faces were everywhere, their crimes detailed in testimony that shocked a nation that had thought it understood Hollywood's darkness, but had only scratched the surface. The names of the girls who had been used, the ones who had survived, the ones who had been willing to testify, became symbols of a system that had failed them. Elizabeth Whitmore's name was among them. Charles Whitmore attended every hearing, sitting in the front row, his face a mask of grief and determination. He had become the public face of the victims' families, giving interviews, demanding justice, making sure that no one forgot what had been done and who had done it. His money funded the legal teams that were preparing the civil suits, the private investigators who were tracking down the men who had escaped prosecution. He called Jack once, near the end of the first week. I want to thank you, he said, for what you did, for finding the truth. I found the truth. I didn't bring her back. No, but you gave her death meaning. You made sure the men who killed her will pay for what they did. That's more than most people ever get. It's not enough. It's never enough, but it's something. They talked for a few more minutes, logistics, mostly details about the ongoing investigation. Then Whitmore said something that stayed with Jack long after the call ended. Be careful, Mr. Dalton. The men who are still free, they're going to be looking for someone to blame, someone to punish. Don't let it be you. I won't. But even as he said it, Jack knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. On the 8th day after the story broke, Jack drove to Colorado. Margaret had given him the address of the cabin where she and Lily were staying, a remote place in the mountains, far from any city, surrounded by trees that blocked the view of anyone approaching. It was as safe as anywhere could be, which wasn't very safe at all. Lily was waiting for him on the porch when he arrived. She ran to him before he was out of the car, throwing herself into his arms with a force that nearly knocked him over. She was crying, her face pressed against his chest, her small body shaking with sobs. "Daddy, Daddy, I was so scared." "I know, sweetheart. I know." He held her tight, breathing in the smell of her hair, feeling the reality of her against him. "But I'm here now. Everything's going to be okay. Mommy says we have to keep hiding. She says bad people are looking for us. There are some bad people, yes. But I'm going to stop them. I promise." She looked up at him, her gray eyes, his eyes red from crying but still trusting, still believing in him, despite everything. "How?" "I'm going to make sure they can't hurt anyone anymore, and then we can go home, and everything will be like it was before." It was a lie. He knew it was a lie even as he said it. Nothing would ever be like it was before. The world had changed, and they had changed with it, and the damage that had been done couldn't be undone. But she was 8 years old, and she needed to believe in something. So he gave her the lie, and she accepted it. And for a few hours they pretended that the world was simple and good, and that fathers could always protect their children. They walked in the woods behind the cabin, looking for birds, identifying trees, playing the same games they played when she was smaller and the world was less complicated. Lily laughed and ran ahead and came back to show him things she'd found: a pine cone, a feather, a rock that sparkled in the sunlight. Jack watched her and felt his heart break. "This is what I'm fighting for," he thought. "This is what matters. Not revenge, not justice, not the abstract idea of making the world better. Just this, just her." When the sun began to set, they walked back to the cabin. Margaret was waiting on the porch, her face unreadable. "You should go," she said, "before it gets dark." "I know." Jack knelt down to Lily's level. "I have to leave now, sweetheart, but I'll be back soon. I promise." "When?" "Soon. As soon as I can." He hugged her one more time, holding her tight, memorizing the feeling of her in his arms. "I love you more than anything in the world. You know that, right?" "I know, Daddy." "Good. Remember that. No matter what happens, remember that." He stood up and walked to his car without looking back. If he looked back, he wouldn't be able to leave, and he had to leave. There was still work to be done, still a war to be fought, still a price to be paid for the choices he'd made. He drove down the mountain as the darkness gathered, watching the cabin grow smaller in his rear-view mirror until it disappeared entirely. Chapter 19. The offer. The trials moved quickly, too quickly for anyone who was paying attention. Kenyon pled guilty to reduced charges and received a sentence that would have him out in 8 years. Reeves copped to tax evasion and got 5 years, most of which he'd serve at a minimum security facility that was more country club than prison. Even Sinclair, who had been facing the most serious charges, managed to negotiate the deal that kept him from serving more than a decade. The system that had been built to protect them was still working, even now. The machine had been damaged, but it hadn't been destroyed. Jack watched the sentencing hearings on television, feeling the familiar hollowness growing inside him. He thought that exposure would be enough, that the scandal would consume them, that justice would somehow emerge from the chaos. He'd been wrong. The men who had destroyed Elizabeth Whitmore and all the others were going to prison. Yes, but they were going to comfortable prisons for comfortable terms, with the knowledge that their money and connections would be waiting for them when they got out. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough, but there was nothing more he could do. On the day of Kenyon's sentencing, Jack received a visitor. He was at home, nursing a drink and watching the news coverage, when there was a knock at the door. He picked up his gun and moved to the side, as had become his habit. "Who is it?" "My name is Robert Ashford. I represent certain interests who would like to speak with you." The voice was cultured, educated, the voice of money and privilege. Jack opened the door. Ashford was exactly what his voice suggested: a man in his 60s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the bearing of someone who had spent his entire life being deferred to. He carried a briefcase that probably cost more than Jack's car. "May I come in?" Jack stepped aside. Ashford looked around the apartment with polite disinterest, the way a man might look at an exhibit in a museum. Then he set his briefcase on the table and opened it. "I'll come directly to the point, Mr. Dalton. The people I represent have watched your investigation with considerable interest. They are impressed by your tenacity, your resourcefulness, and your willingness to see things through to their conclusion. Who are these people? Names aren't important. What's important is that they have resources, significant resources, and they're prepared to use those resources to solve a problem that concerns all parties. What problem is that? You, Mr. Dalton. Ashford smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. You've become a symbol, a reminder of what can happen when someone asks the wrong questions, goes to the wrong places, refuses to accept the conventional wisdom. My clients find that inconvenient. Are you here to threaten me? On the contrary, I'm here to make you an offer. Ashford reached into his briefcase and withdrew an envelope. Inside this envelope is a cashier's check for $500,000. Also inside is a one-way ticket to South America, Brazil, specifically, where my clients have made arrangements for you to live quite comfortably for the rest of your life. Jack didn't touch the envelope. In exchange for what? In exchange for your silence, your absence, your willingness to disappear and never speak of these matters again. Ashford's voice was reasonable, almost friendly. It's a generous offer, Mr. Dalton. More generous than most people in your position receive. And if I refuse, then other arrangements will be made, less pleasant ones. The friendly tone didn't change. The threat was all the more chilling for its casualness. My clients prefer the civilized approach, but they are prepared to be uncivilized, if necessary. Jack looked at the envelope, at the check that represented more money than he'd ever seen, at the ticket to a life without fear or struggle or responsibility. He thought about Lily, about Margaret, about the people he loved, and the danger he put them in. He thought about Elizabeth Whitmore, taking her last breath in a desert somewhere while men laughed. Tell your clients, he said, that I'm not for sale. Ashford was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd suspected all along. I was afraid you'd say that. He closed the briefcase and stood up. You're making a mistake, Mr. Dalton. A serious one. My clients don't forget, and they don't forgive. What happened to Mr. Kenyon and the others? That was a battle. The war is far from over, and I'll keep fighting. You'll lose, maybe, but at least I'll lose standing up. Ashford walked to the door, then paused and looked back. Your daughter, he said. Lily. She's in Colorado, isn't she? A cabin in the mountains. Very remote, very isolated. Jack's hand moved to his gun. If anything happens to her, nothing will happen to her. Not today, not tomorrow. Ashford's smile was thin, predatory. But children grow up, Mr. Dalton. They go to school, make friends, fall in love. They become vulnerable in ways that can't be protected against. My clients are patient men, very patient. They can wait. He walked out, closing the door behind him. Jack stood in the silence of his apartment, his hand still on his gun, his heart hammering near his chest. The war wasn't over. It had barely begun, and he was running out of ways to fight it. Chapter 20. The Evidence. The weeks that followed were a kind of purgatory. Trials concluded. The sentences were handed down. The newspapers moved on to other scandals. Elysium became a footnote, a piece of Hollywood history that people would talk about in hushed tones for a few years and then mostly forget. The girls who had been used, the ones who had survived, tried to rebuild their lives. Some succeeded. Many didn't. Jack went back to work, taking small cases that paid the bills and kept him busy. Missing persons, insurance fraud, the usual detritus of a life, lived in the margins. He told himself it was a living. He told himself it was better than nothing. Margaret and Lily came back from Colorado. The immediate danger seemed to have passed. No more watchers appeared outside their house. No more threats arrived in the mail. Jack resumed his every other weekend visits, his Wednesday phone calls, the careful maintenance of a relationship that was all he had left. Lily seemed unchanged by the experience, resilient in the way that children often are, able to set aside trauma and move forward with a directness that adults have lost. She talked about school, about her friends, about the things that 8-year-olds talk about. She didn't mention the cabin or the running or the fear. Jack watched her and felt the weight of what he'd done settling into his bones. He'd exposed the machine. He'd brought down powerful men. He'd given Elizabeth Whitmore's death meaning and purpose, but the cost was still being calculated, and he suspected the final tally would be higher than he could bear. On a Tuesday evening in October, 3 months after the story broke, Jack received a package. It was delivered by courier, a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph and a note. The photograph showed Lily at school, walking out of the building with a group of other children. She was laughing at something, her blonde hair catching the sunlight, her face bright with the particular joy of being young and unaware of the darkness in the world. The note said simply, "We haven't forgotten." Jack sat in his apartment for a long time, looking at the photograph, feeling the cold spread through his chest. They were watching, they were waiting, and eventually, when they were ready, they were going to collect their debt. He picked up the phone and called Margaret. "Jack, what is it? How's Lily?" "She's fine. She's doing her homework." "Why?" "Just keep an eye on her. Don't let her out of your sight." "Jack, what's going on? You're scaring me." "I know. I'm sorry. Just be careful, please." He hung up and sat in the darkness, watching the city lights through his window, thinking about all the ways the world could hurt the people he loved. The war wasn't over. He'd known that. But somehow, holding the photograph in his hands, seeing Lily's face smiling up at him, the knowledge became real in a way it hadn't been before. They were coming. Sooner or later, they were coming, and he wasn't sure he could stop them. End of Part 3. The Society. Part 4. The Cost. Chapter 21. The strike. 6 months passed. The trials ended. The sentences began, and the world moved on in the way that worlds do, finding new scandals, new outrages, new reasons to be shocked and then forget. Harold Kenyon was photographed playing tennis at his minimum security facility. Walter Reeves wrote a memoir that no one read. Arthur Sinclair remained in hiding somewhere in Europe, waiting for the statute of limitations to expire on charges that had never been filed. Jack settled into a routine that felt like surrender. He worked his cases, saw his daughter, tried not to think about the photograph in his desk drawer or the note that had accompanied it. The threat was there, always there, but as the months passed without incident, he began to allow himself to hope that it might remain just a further reminder of what could happen, rather than a promise of what would. He was wrong. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon in April. Jack was at his office, going through paperwork on a case that didn't matter, when the phone rang. "Mr. Dalton?" The voice was unfamiliar, official. "This is Sergeant Williams, Pasadena Police Department. I'm calling about your daughter." The world stopped. "What about her? What happened?" "There's been an accident, sir. A hit and run outside her school. She's being transported to Huntington Memorial. You should get there as soon as you can." Jack was at the door before the sergeant finished speaking. The drive to Pasadena took 45 minutes. Jack made it in 25, running red lights, weaving through traffic, his hands white, knuckled on the steering wheel. His mind was a blur of images: Lily laughing, Lily running, Lily sleeping in her too-big bed with her blonde hair spread across the pillow. Please, he thought. Please, God, please. He didn't believe in God. Hadn't believed in years. But in that moment, racing through the streets of Los Angeles, he prayed anyway, bargaining with a universe that had never been fair and never would be. Take me instead. Take anything, just not her. Not her. He found Margaret in the waiting room outside the emergency department. Her face was ashen, her eyes red from crying, her whole body trembling with a grief that had no outlet. "Jack, where is she? Is she okay?" "She's in surgery. Margaret's voice broke. "They said it was bad. A car hit her and didn't stop. They said she couldn't finish." She collapsed against him, sobbing, and Jack held her, feeling her grief and his own mixing together into something that couldn't be contained. "Who did this?" he asked. "They don't know. The car was stolen. No witnesses. No license plate. Just—" She pulled back, looking at him with eyes that were suddenly hard. "This wasn't an accident, was it? This was them. The people you went after. Jack couldn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Jack and Margaret sat in the waiting room, side by side, but miles apart, watching the clock and praying for a miracle. Doctors came and went. Nurses checked in with updates that said nothing and everything stable condition, still in surgery, doing everything we can. At some point, Howard arrived, Margaret's husband, Lily's stepfather, a man Jack had never been able to hate no matter how much he tried. Howard sat on Margaret's other side, holding her hand, being the steady presence that Jack had never been able to be. At 6:30, the doctor emerged from the surgical suite. His face told them everything before he opened his mouth. "I'm sorry," he said. "We did everything we could." The world ended. Chapter 22. The Victory. The funeral was held on a Saturday. The weather was beautiful, clear blue sky, warm sunshine, the kind of day that Lily would have loved. The church was packed with people who had known her, or known her family, or just wanted to pay their respects. Her classmates were there, looking confused and frightened, too young to understand what death really meant. Jack sat in the front row, between Margaret and Howard, and felt nothing. Not grief that would come later, he knew, would crash over him like a wave and pull him under. Not rage that too was waiting, patient and cold, coiled in his chest like a snake waiting to strike. Just emptiness. A void where his daughter had been, where all the love and hope and fear had lived. The minister spoke words that meant nothing. Lily's teacher spoke words that meant nothing. Margaret stood up and tried to say something about her daughter, but couldn't finish, breaking down into sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her body. Jack didn't speak. He couldn't. There were no words for what he was feeling, what he had done, what had been taken from him. Afterward, at the reception, people approached him with condolences and platitudes. "So sorry for your loss. She's in a better place. Time heals all wounds." Jack accepted their words and said the things that grieving fathers were supposed to say, and felt the emptiness growing larger with every meaningless exchange. Charles Whitmore was there. He had flown in from Connecticut as soon as he'd heard, and he found Jack standing alone in a corner, staring at a photograph of Lily that someone had placed on a table. "I'm sorry," Whitmore said. "I know that doesn't mean anything. I know nothing I say can help, but I'm sorry." "You warned me," Jack said. His voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from someone else. "At the end of the case, you told me to be careful." "I did. I wasn't careful enough." Whitmore was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that would stay with Jack for the rest of his life. "When Elizabeth died, I wanted revenge. I wanted the men who killed her to suffer the way she suffered, to feel the fear and the pain and the helplessness. And when you brought them down, when they went to prison, I thought I would feel satisfied. I thought justice would fill the hole that grief had carved out of me." He shook his head. "It didn't. Nothing fills that hole. Nothing ever will. But at least my daughter's death meant something. At least she didn't die for nothing." "Lily didn't die for anything," Jack said. "She died because I was arrogant, because I thought I could fight them and win, because I put my crusade ahead of my family." "You can't know that. The accident. It wasn't an accident. We both know it wasn't an accident." Jack turned to face Whitmore, and there was something in his eyes that made the older man step back. "They did this. The men I couldn't reach, the ones who stayed hidden, the ones who were patient enough to wait until I let my guard down. They killed my daughter to punish me for exposing them. That's true. It's true. And there's nothing I can do about it. Nothing anyone can do. They've won." Jack's voice was flat, dead. "I wrote down their operation. I sent their people to prison. And in return, they took the only thing that mattered to me. That's the exchange. That's the price." Whitmore had no answer to that. There was no answer. They stood together in silence. Two fathers who had lost their daughters to the same machine, and mourned what could never be recovered. Chapter 23. The Quiet. The weeks after the funeral were the hardest of Jack's life. He didn't go back to work. He couldn't face the office, the cases, the endless parade of other people's problems, when his own had consumed everything. He sat in his apartment, drinking too much, sleeping too little, watching the days blur together into an undifferentiated mass of grief. Margaret didn't call. He didn't expect her to. Whatever fragile peace they had built in the years since the divorce was gone now, destroyed by the same forces that had destroyed everything else. She blamed him for taking the case, for making enemies, for failing to protect their daughter. He didn't argue. She was right. Ben Carter came by once, early on. He stood in the doorway of Jack's apartment, looking at the empty bottles and the unwashed dishes and the evidence of a man who had given up. "This isn't you," Carter said. "This isn't who you are. You don't know who I am. Neither do I. Not anymore. The man I know would be looking for answers, would be trying to find out who did this, who gave the order, who was responsible. I know who's responsible." Jack's voice was dull, lifeless. "I'm responsible. I poked a hornet's nest and acted surprised when I got stung. That's not. Go home, Ben. I don't need a pep talk. I don't need anything." Carter left. He didn't come back. The investigation into Lily's death went nowhere. The car had been found abandoned in East Los Angeles, wiped clean of fingerprints. No trace of whoever had been driving. There were no witnesses. No surveillance footage. Nothing that could lead the police to whoever had done this. The case remained open, officially, but Jack knew it would never be solved. The people who had ordered his daughter's death had been covering their tracks for decades. They weren't going to get caught now. He thought about hunting them himself. Spent long nights with a bottle and a gun, working through scenarios, planning approaches, imagining the satisfaction of putting bullets into the men who had taken Lily from him. But the scenarios always ended the same way, with Jack dead in some alley, and the men who had killed his daughter going on with their lives as if nothing had happened. They were too powerful, too protected, too insulated from the consequences of their actions. He had exposed them, and they had survived. He had fought them, and they had won. A month after the funeral, he visited Lily's grave for the first time. It was early morning, the cemetery quiet except for the birdsong and the distant hum of traffic. The headstone was simple, just her name, her dates, and a line that Margaret had chosen. "Beloved daughter, forever in our hearts." Jack stood before it, feeling the weight of everything he had lost and everything he had failed to do. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I let my work become more important than your safety. I'm sorry for everything." The headstone didn't answer. The dead never do. He knelt down and touched the grass that was beginning to grow over her grave, feeling the cool earth beneath his fingers. "I love you," he said. "I'll always love you. No matter what happens, no matter what I become, you're the best thing I ever did, the best thing I ever was." He stayed there for a long time, talking to a daughter who couldn't hear him, saying all the things he should have said when she was alive. When he finally left, the sun was high in the sky, and the world was continuing on without him, the way worlds do. Chapter 24. The day, 3 months after Lily's death. Vincent Lennox came to see him. It was evening, the light fading from the sky, when Jack heard the knock at his door. He wasn't expecting anyone, hadn't been expecting anyone for a long time, but he picked up his gun and went to answer anyway. Lomax stood in the hallway, looking exactly as he had the last time Jack had seen him, calm, composed, his expression revealing nothing. "May I come in?" Jack should have shot him. He knew that, even as he stepped aside and let the man enter. But some part of him, some broken, exhausted part, wanted to hear what Lomax had to say, wanted to understand. Lomax looked around the apartment, taking in the evidence of Jack's deterioration with the same detached interest he might show a mildly interesting piece of art. "You've stopped taking care of yourself," he observed. "I've stopped caring. There's a difference." "Is there?" Lomax sat down in one of Jack's chairs, uninvited, as if he owned the place. "I came to offer my condolences. I know that seems hypocritical, given the circumstances. I want you to know what happened to your daughter was not something I advocated for. But you didn't stop it." "No, I didn't." Lomax's voice was quiet, almost reflective. "There are forces in this world, Mr. Dalton, that are larger than any individual, larger than you, larger than me, larger than the men I work for. You stumbled into one of those forces when you investigated Elizabeth Whitmore. What happened afterward to her, to you, to your daughter was the inevitable result. Inevitable. The word tasted like ash in Jack's mouth. That's what you call it. The murder of an 8-year-old girl is inevitable. Consequences, Mr. Dalton. Everything has consequences. You made choices, and your daughter paid the price. That's not justice, it's not fair, but it's how the world works. Why are you here? To gloat? To make sure I understand how thoroughly you've beaten me? No. Lomax leaned forward, and for the first time, Jack saw something almost like sincerity in his eyes. I'm here because I want you to understand something. The men who ordered your daughter's death, they didn't do it out of cruelty. They didn't do it because they enjoyed it. They did it because you left them no choice. No choice? You brought down their operation. You exposed their names, their methods, their secrets. You cost them money, power, reputation. Some of them went to prison. Others will spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. Lomax's voice was patient, explanatory, as if he were teaching a difficult child. In our world, that can't go unanswered. If you let one man get away with defying you, others will try. The system depends on the consequences. So my daughter was a consequence. Yes, I'm sorry. Truly, she was an innocent. But the men I work for don't distinguish between the innocent and the guilty. They only distinguish between those who threaten them and those who don't. Jack looked at the man sitting in his apartment, at his calm face and his reasonable voice, and felt something shift inside him. Not rage, he was beyond rage now. Something colder, something final. Get out, he said. Mr. Dalton, get out, now. Lomax stood up slowly. He walked to the door, then paused and looked back. For what it's worth, he said, I hope you find some peace. Not everyone does after something like this. But you were a good man once. Maybe you can be again. Get out. Lomax left. Jack sat alone in his apartment, his gun in his hand, and thought about consequences. Chapter 25. The Aftermath. In the months that followed, Jack rebuilt himself. Not into the man he had been. That man was gone, buried with his daughter, but into something else, something harder, something that could survive in a world that had taken everything from him and expected him to keep living anyway. He went back to work, not for the studios that door was closed forever, but as an independent investigator, taking cases that no one else would touch, the ones that were too dangerous, too complicated, too likely to get someone killed. He had nothing left to lose, and that made him fearless in ways that terrified the people who hired him. He became known in certain circles as a man who would do anything to solve a case, a man who couldn't be threatened, couldn't be bought, couldn't be deterred. The dark side of the sun. A colleague called him once, and the name stuck. He never remarried, never had another relationship that lasted more than a few months. The capacity for that kind of connection had been burned out of him, replaced by a cold efficiency that served his work, but left him empty when the work was done. Margaret moved to San Francisco with Howard. She sent Jack a Christmas card the first year, then nothing. He didn't blame her. There was nothing left between them but shared grief and shared guilt, and neither of those was enough to build a relationship on. He visited Lily's grave once a month, on the anniversary of her death. He would stand there for an hour, sometimes more, talking to a headstone that never answered. He told her about his cases, about the people he helped, about the world that was still turning without her. He told her he loved her, over and over, because that was the only truth that hadn't been destroyed. The men who had killed her were never caught. Jack knew their names had worked out, who must have given the order, which of the Elysium survivors had the resources and the ruthlessness to arrange a hit and run on an 8-year-old girl. But knowing wasn't enough. He couldn't prove anything, couldn't build a case that would stand up in court, couldn't find justice through the systems that had failed him so completely. He thought about taking justice into his own hands, spent long nights planning it, mapping out approaches, imagining himself pulling the trigger on the men who had taken his daughter. But he never did it, not because he was afraid, and not because he had moral objections, but because he understood finally, too late, that revenge wouldn't bring Lily back, wouldn't fill the void her death had left, wouldn't make anything better. The man who had killed her would die eventually, of old age or illness, or the same violence they had inflicted on others. And when they did, they would face whatever judgment waited for them. Jack didn't believe in God anymore, but he believed in consequences. Everyone paid eventually. Everyone. He would wait. Chapter 26. The Visit. 5 years after Lily's death, Jack received an unexpected visitor. He was in his office, a small place in Hollywood. Nothing like the operation he'd run for Continental, when there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find a young woman he didn't recognize, early 20s, dark-haired, with eyes that held a familiar combination of hope and determination. "Mr. Dalton, my name is Sarah Whitmore. I'm Charles Whitmore's granddaughter, Elizabeth's niece." Jack stood aside to let her in. She sat in the chair across from his desk, looking around at the sparse furnishings, the files stacked on every surface, the evidence of a life lived in service of other people's problems. "I know about you," she said. "My grandfather told me the story. What you did for Elizabeth. What it cost you. It was a long time ago. It was. But I wanted to meet you anyway. To thank you." "Thank me." The word felt strange in Jack's mouth. "For what?" "For not giving up. For seeing it through. Even when they threatened you. Even when they—" She stopped, swallowed. "I know about your daughter. I'm sorry." "Don't be. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't yours either." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "My grandfather died last year. Did you know?" "I heard. Before he died, he talked about you a lot. He said you were the only honest man he'd ever met in Los Angeles, the only one who couldn't be bought or scared off." She smiled, a sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He said you paid the highest price anyone could pay, and you did it for a girl you'd never met." "I did it for a lot of reasons, most of them selfish." "Maybe, but the result was the same. Elizabeth's killers went to prison. The operation was destroyed. Other girls were saved because of what you did." She paused. "That matters. Even with everything that came after, it matters." Jack was quiet for a long moment. He thought about Elizabeth Whitmore, about the photograph that had started everything, about the hope in her eyes and the darkness that had consumed her. He thought about Lily, about the grave he visited every month, about the void that would never be filled. "Why are you here?" he asked. "Because I wanted to tell you something. Something my grandfather asked me to say. If I had ever got the chance." Sarah leaned forward, her voice soft but certain. "He wanted you to know that he never blamed you for Elizabeth, or for Lily, or for any of it. He said you did what was right. And sometimes doing what's right costs more than anyone should have to pay. But it's still right." Jack looked at the young woman sitting across from him, at her earnest face and her hopeful eyes, and felt something stir in the emptiness where his heart used to be. "Tell him." He stopped, remembering. "Tell your mother, if she's still alive. Tell her I appreciate that." "I will." Sarah stood up to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back. "My grandfather said something else, too. He said the darkness never wins forever, that even the deepest shadow is broken by the smallest light." She smiled. "I don't know if that's true, but I hope it is." She left. Jack sat alone in his office, thinking about darkness and light, about the price of doing what was right, about all the ghosts that lived in the spaces between his memories. He pulled out the photograph of Lily, the one he kept in his desk. Always the one that showed her at 6 years old with her missing front teeth and her impossible smile. "I hoped so too," he said to no one. Chapter 27. The Reckoning. Another 5 years passed. Jack aged, slowly at first, and then all at once, the way men do when they've stopped caring whether they live or die. His hair went gray, then white. His face grew lined, whether by years of cases and whiskey and grief. He kept working, couldn't stop, really, because without work there was nothing, but the fire that had once driven him was banked now, reduced to embers. He had outlived most of the men who had killed his daughter. Kenyon died in prison of a heart attack that surprised no one who knew how he'd lived. Ryu succumbed to cancer 3 years after his release. Sinclair was found dead in his villa in Spain, officially of natural causes, though rumors suggested otherwise. One by one, they had departed the world, taking their secrets and their sins with them. Vincent Lomax was the last. Jack found him on a beach in Santa Monica, early in the morning, watching the waves come in. He was an old man, now older than Jack had ever imagined him becoming, and there was a frailty to him that seemed impossible, given the power he had once wielded. Jack sat down on the sand beside him. "Mr. Dalton." Lomax didn't seem surprised. Perhaps he had been expecting this in some way. Perhaps he had always known it would end here. The two of them facing the ocean, facing the end of everything. It's been a long time. Not long enough. No, I don't suppose it has. Lomax was quiet for a moment, watching the waves. "I knew you'd come eventually. I've been watching for you." "Why?" "Because we have unfinished business. Because the story isn't complete without this conversation." Lomax turned to look at him, and his eyes were tired. So tired. "I'm dying, Mr. Dalton. Cancer. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe less. So if you've come to kill me, you'll need to do it soon." "I haven't come to kill you." "No?" Lomax seemed genuinely surprised. "Then why?" Jack thought about the question. He had asked himself the same thing many times in the years since Lily's death. Why had he survived? Why had he kept going? What was left to fight for when everything that mattered had been taken from him? "I came to tell you something," he said. "Something I should have said a long time ago." "What's that?" "You were right." The words tasted like surrender, but they were true. About consequences. About the world and how it works. "You were right about all of it." Lomax was quiet for a long moment. "I take no pleasure in being right," he said finally. "I never did. The world is what it is, Mr. Dalton. I didn't make it this way. I just learned to survive in it." "So did I." They sat in silence, two old men, watching the ocean, the weight of years and choices and consequences pressing down on them. "Your daughter," Lomax said finally. "I want you to know I argued against it. When they decided to take action against you, I told them it was a mistake, that killing a child would only make you more dangerous, more determined. They didn't listen. Would it have mattered if they had? No, probably not. They had already made up their minds." Lomax shook his head. "The men I worked for, they weren't evil. Not in the way you probably think. They were just men, protecting their interests, maintaining their power. They did what they thought was necessary." "And my daughter was necessary?" "To them? Yes." Lomax's voice was soft, almost gentle. "I'm sorry, Mr. Dalton. I know that doesn't mean anything, but I am sorry for what happened to her. For what happened to you. For all of it." Jack looked at the man who had destroyed his life, at the frail, dying shell of the fixer who had once seemed so invincible, and felt something unexpected. "Pity. Go home," he said. "Spend your last months with whatever family you have left. Make your peace with whatever God you believe in. And try to remember." He paused, searching for words. "Try to remember that it mattered. What we did. Who we were. Even the darkness mattered." Lomax nodded slowly. He didn't speak again. Jack stood up and walked away, leaving the old man on the beach, watching the waves, waiting for the end that was coming for them all. Chapter 28. The bright side. Jack Dalton died on a Tuesday afternoon in May. He was 73 years old. He had spent his last years in a small apartment in Venice, close enough to the ocean to hear the waves at night, far enough from the city to forget what it had cost him. He had stopped working 2 years before couldn't any more, not with his health failing, and had spent his time reading, thinking, remembering. The end came quietly. A heart attack, the doctor said later, quick and painless. If anything about dying can be painless. He was found in his chair by a neighbor who came to check on him, the photograph of Lily still in his hands. The funeral was small. A few people from his old life, other investigators, former clients, men and women whose lives he had touched in one way or another. Ben Carter was there, old and gray but still sharp, still fighting the good fight in a world that never seemed to learn. Margaret came, surprisingly a widow now, Howard having passed the year before, and she stood at the grave with dry eyes and a face that held more peace than Jack had ever seen in her. There was no minister. Jack had left instructions about that. Instead, people spoke about him in their own words, sharing memories and stories, trying to capture something of who he had been and what he had meant. No one mentioned the Elysium case. No one mentioned Lily. Some wounds are too deep to acknowledge in public. Afterward, when the others had gone, Margaret stood alone at the grave. She looked at the headstone, just his name, his dates, nothing more, and thought about the man she had married, the man who had given her a daughter, the man who had spent his life fighting battles that couldn't be won. "You loved her," she said to the grave. "I know you did. More than anything in the world. More than your own life." She wiped at her eyes, surprised to find tears there after all. "I blamed you for so long. Hated you, even. But I don't anymore. I can't. Because you did what you thought was right, and the world punished you for it, and you kept going anyway. That takes something. Something I never had." She stood there for a long time, talking to a headstone that couldn't answer, saying all the things she should have said when he was alive. When she finally left, she felt lighter somehow, as if some burden she had been carrying for years had finally been set down. In the apartment in Venice, among Jack's few possessions, they found a letter. It was addressed to no one, dated the day before his death, written in a hand that shook but remained legible. "I've spent my whole life looking for something I could never find. Justice, truth, a world that made sense. I thought if I worked hard enough, fought long enough, exposed enough darkness, I could make things right. I thought the truth would set us free. I was wrong. The truth doesn't set anyone free. It just shows you the bars of your cage. The world is what is broken, cruel, indifferent to the suffering of the innocent. You can fight it, rail against it, sacrifice everything trying to change it, and maybe you'll make a small difference. Maybe you'll save a few people, expose a few villains, leave the world slightly better than you found it. But you'll never win. Not really. Not completely. Because the darkness is always there, waiting, patient. It was there before you, and it'll be there after you. The best you can do is hold it back for a while. Light a candle in the void, and hope it's enough. I had a daughter once. Her name was Lily. She was 8 years old when they took her from me. I think about her every day, her smile, her laugh, the way she used to look at me like I could fix anything. I couldn't fix anything. I couldn't even protect her. That's the truth I've lived with for 40 years, and it's the truth I'll die with. But here's the thing. Even knowing how it ends, I wouldn't change what I did. I exposed the men who killed Elizabeth Whitmore. I brought down an operation that was destroying young women. I made the world a little safer for a little while. And if the price was everything I loved, if the price was Lily, no, I can't say that. I can't pretend it was worth it, because it wasn't. Nothing is worth that. Nothing ever could be. But I did what I thought was right, in a world that doesn't reward that, doesn't even acknowledge it. Most of the time, I stood for something. And maybe that's all any of us can do. Stand for something, fight for something, love something enough to die for it. I loved my daughter. I love her still. And wherever she is now, if there's anything after this, any light beyond the darkness, I hope she knows that. I hope she forgives me. I hope I get to tell her myself, someday. This is the bright side of the sun, the shadow we cast when we try to face the light. The letter was found by the neighbor who discovered Jack's body. She read it once, then placed it in a box with his other papers and sent everything to an address she found in his contacts, a lawyer who handled his affairs, a man Jack had trusted with his final wishes. The lawyer read the letter and set it aside. Some truths are too heavy to share. In a cemetery in Pasadena, on a spring afternoon, when the sky was impossibly blue and the birds were singing, 2 graves stood side by side. One belonged to Lily Dalton, age 8. The other belonged to her father. The headstone said nothing about what had happened to either of them, nothing about the case that had brought them both to this place, or the men who had destroyed them, or the fight that had consumed one generation and taken another. They said only names and dates, and in Jack's case, a line he had chosen himself. He tried, and between the headstones and the soft earth that covered them both, a small wildflower was beginning to bloom. The end. The bright side of the sun. A novel by the YouTube channel Musings of a Cigarette Smoking Man.
Goonie goo goo.
And a double goonie goo goo to you, my friend.
And a triple goonie goo.
Hey, cut that shit, don't you fucking idiots come around here speaking that goonie goo goo shit.